There we go, much better. You should be able to hear me on YouTube now, so I'm just going to go back over the intro. Much appreciated for attending the classroom today, for everybody who's here and everybody who's interested in watching the repeats of the videos. You're more than welcome to. I hope that you managed to pull a lot of information from it. Today's lesson is actually the second one. Last month's was the introduction to VMaNGOS. You should be able to hear me on YouTube now, so I'm just going to go back over the intro. I'm going to mute myself. Today's lesson is going to involve more so reviewing the structures of the server core and the database, along with the DBC, which is the database client files that are used by the client. We're going to talk about how most of them interact, and particularly we're going to focus on the ones that people are really interested in, which of course is stuff like spell templates and creature templates, item templates, different things that you can adjust and change in your server very easily, and it'll help you add customization and different detailing to your server. So for now, what I'd like to say is we're going to be downloading this link. I will post it in the Discord, and just click on that. That's assuming that you're obviously on Windows, either 32 or 64-bit. Just download and extract to the downloaded folder. And you'll see, if you're 32-bit, click Win3264, which you're probably. And this will be the MPQ editor. Lodix MPQ editor is a program that's used to view, edit, change, modify MPQ files. Now, MPQ files are much like a zip file that is proprietary Blizzard format. It's actually short for Mopac file, which is named after its creator, a Blizzard employee. I can't remember his exact name. I think it's Chris something. But regardless, there's a proprietary file structure system that they had created back in Warcraft, and that's why you'll see Diablo and Warcraft and Starcraft and all the old Blizzard games, computer games, use MPQ files. And again, it's much like a zip file. It's structured specifically in a certain way for the clients to read it in an accessible manner. So it'll contain all the information, really, that is used by the client. Basically, everything within the client, you'll see all the information is contained within an MPQ file. There's a few others that are in the client that aren't in an MPQ, and those are mostly interface elements and LUA, XML, which is also contained in MPQs, depending on what you're looking at. But for today, we're just going to get the MPQ editor, download that. It doesn't require an install or anything. Let's see. Okay, so our first time opening it, it's going to prompt us to make sure that everything is correct. I would... MCG files. Okay, these should all be accurate, so you just press OK and use the default options. If they have to be changed later, we can change them later. And we don't particularly need to open the program. Typically, you'll just double-click the patch file, and you'll be able to pull it up right in there. What I would do is open with and associate Lodix MPQ editor with MPQ type files. So now every time we just double click, oop, shouldn't close it that way, but that's fine. Alright, and we're going to go into our client folder, and the data folder, of course, you'll have all the patches. If you have a Wallcraft patch, the patch 3 file, you can just double click it and open it. If you don't have a Wallcraft patch 3 file, you can browse the patch 2, but you'll never ever want really to edit any of the default client files. If you're creating a heavily customized server, there are a few things that you can edit, but the way that the MPQ file system works is that it will essentially read everything in a list. It's not alphabetical order for all the elements, but essentially if you have a patch 3 file, any files within the patch 3 that are present will override any of the previous patch files. So the spell templates in patch 2 are completely disregarded because there's a patch 3 spell template active that you'll see within the Wallcraft patch. And since this is here, it's just called spell DBC. Since this is here, none of the information from the other MPQs for the spell DBC is bothered to be loaded. It just loads the most recent one. And essentially this creates a layered structure for the client to use, where you can just keep patching stuff on top of it without having to edit older stuff. And that's a very big deal in terms of client management, and something that Blizzard really pioneered at the time was this type of file structure being used to rapidly patch clients. And obviously they're not the first ones to do it, but the Blizzard BattleNet patch system was seen as revolutionary at the time, because this was like the early days of online gaming. So to be able to get your client patched when you start it up and not have to worry about anything is a really big deal. And you didn't need to re-download the whole client. You didn't need to edit patches. Nothing needed to really be deleted. It just lasagna, layer by layer on top, and that's how the client will read everything. 3 Chimes asks in chat, if something was labeled patch 4, would that override patch 3 things? Correct. So especially too if you run a lot of custom skins or models. If you use later client models in vanilla client, you'll see that you'll have multiple patch files. You might have a patch 4, 5, 6. The default patch for vanilla is patch 2. That's the highest default patch. Anything after that is custom. If you have multiple custom patches, let's say you have a model changing patch, and you're playing on Wallcraft with a model changing patch, what you'll want to do is you'll want to load your model changing patch last, but then arises the issue is any custom entries within that like display info template essentially will be overridden. So if I'm using custom models on Wallcraft or something and you're using Warlords of Draenor model pack on your vanilla client, you'll have to load it last for it to work, and it will make any custom Wallcraft ones not work. Now, the solution to this obviously would be to edit your Warlords of Draenor patch yourself and include the new entries directly within the Warlords of Draenor patch, or consolidate them all into the Wallcraft patch. That would be the most efficient way to correct an issue like that, and that's something that I'll teach you how to do, essentially. Plax asks, could I use patch 2? Yes, you can use patch 2, but I wouldn't edit anything in it. For today's lesson, we're just basically going to be taking a look over the structure. So if you don't have a Wallcraft patch 3, you can get a patch 3 off my website if you want, just a patch to edit and mess around with. But for now, you can just browse the patch 2, so just open patch 2. We're not going to be touching anything in it. And in fact, I'll just open the patch 2 and see what's exactly in it. Patch 2 came out, I want to say, post BWL. I can't remember the exact timing, but if you take a look here, you'll see like new entries in any of these databases, DBC files. Any of the new entries are typically like 4 or 5 extra entries and a bunch of edits that you'd have to run diffs on to find out anything that really changed elsewise. But if we were to take a look at like item sets, you'll see like the 2 or 3 new item sets that were added with patch 3 or patch 2. And obviously the patch 2 gets extended out a little bit because it's considered the stuff that is post-release of the game. So we're going to take a look at Lodix MPQ editor first in a little bit more detail, just to make sure that we have a good grasp on it, how to use it properly. Obviously these are patch files, so you want to be careful with them. You want them to be as small as possible and not bloated. In fact, you'll see my patch right now is about 250,000 kilobytes. And I can probably compress this down to 200 maybe, but I regularly compress it just to make sure it's small. So for what we're going to do right now is we're just going to open up names profanity DBC. We'll get to that one later. That's a funny one to read through. But for now, we're just going to double click on patch 2 after we've associated it with Lodix MPQ editor. If you don't have the option to, it'll ask, what do you want to open it with? Just select the program that you had downloaded. It'll be in the x64 folder, you'll see it. And we're going to open up the patch 2 file. And we're going to take a look and see exactly really how the structures of it all work. Now, there's different folders, different subfolders within the patch 2 file. And you're going to see the directory essentially indicates what's inside of it. Creatures will have different creature visuals and skins, which are represented by M2 files. This is a model file, proprietary Blizzard model file. Hippogriffs were added for the hippogriff pet in patch 2. Same with Landra Longshot and some BLP, which are skin files, essentially texture files for this mounted Death Knight, likely one of the Naxxramas 4 Horsemen. If we go down to DB files client, these are all the DBC files. This is where they'll be contained in DB files client subdirectory. And DBCs are essentially the same thing that you were working with last time in Heidi. All of the database files, these are very often, more than not, mirror copies of those same database tables. But these are structured with DBC files for the client to read. and the World of Warcraft client reads all of these DBCs in a similar manner. So the structure, obviously, for the server attempts to mirror the client files, because that's basically how it would have worked for Blizzard. If we double-click on any of these, we can open it up, and it'll pull up the... Actually, we'll need to download something first. My apologies. We'll get to that in a moment, but if we double-click on any of these, they'll pop open in our DBC editor of choice. Typically, I wouldn't edit them directly from the patch. Sometimes you'll need to, but very rarely. When you edit files for a DBC, you'll want to edit them within your server instead, and then you don't have to worry about anything else like that. In fact, we're just going to take a look at... We'll take a look at Everlook right now, because I think this is the only... No, we got Wallcraft Dev. Okay. So if we go into our server directory folder, and we double-click on the 5875 folder, that is the DBC files that were extracted from the client that the server uses to read. A lot of the tables within the server hosted up in Heidi, that you edit in Heidi, you won't see them present within the client because they're information that is server side. Anything that is shown in the client obviously needs to be contained within a DBC for it to be visible. That's, where the information is pulled from. So you'll often see, like I said, mirrors of the tables between the DBC and the client and the server itself. If you look at the spell template table within Heidi, you'll see that it's a, like I said, an exact copy pretty much of the spell DBC. The names might be slightly different between them, and most emulators try to use similar names. There's a lot of files within the client that the server doesn't need because they're strictly client side, and one example of that would be something like display info for models or creatures. The server doesn't need that because that's simply used client side to display visual assets, and the server doesn't have any effect over that aside from the raw data that it might need in terms of like bounding radius. So you'll see like creature display info. Creature display info DBC within your client files, and creature display info extra DBC. And if you were to open up Heidi, you would see creature display info add-on. Add-on table within Heidi for that essentially doesn't need the actual model names or data. It's information that's unnecessary, so it would be considered bloat. But it does need bounding radius and different box coordinates and sizes. So it'll have that information listed within the server, and it will use that in addition to these. But that's one example of where there would be a difference between the server and the client. Again, some information doesn't need to be used by the server, and some information isn't used by the client. It's handled server side. An example of something that's handled server side and not within the client whatsoever would be your spell proc event table. Within Heidi, you'll see spell proc event table is used by the server to determine how and when and why spells proc and have different triggers. An example of this would be like any type of focus casting ability or clear casting, for example. For a shaman, a clear casting spell won't trigger from a healing spell, it'll only trigger from offensive spells. So the spell proc event table within Heidi will essentially contain all the information required to make that happen. It'll have flags listed that will indicate how the spell should proc. It'll have different spell family masks for different types of spells that are able to proc it specifically. And it'll have proc per minute and custom chances, different things like that. That information is strictly used by the server. The client doesn't need it, the client shouldn't need it, and the client shouldn't even have it, really. Which is why a lot of the stuff within private servers over the years has been seen as a little off. That's because stuff like that is purely guesswork. Even nowadays, most of the stuff that is in VMaNGOS is taken from sniffs directly. But stuff like proc events, you literally have people play testing and they'll just hit a dummy for 10,000 hits and measure the average proc per minute. And then that's the information that's used. So, and that's why if you played on Everlook, you'll notice that proc per minute is actually higher than typical VMaNGOS or what you'd find with stock VMaNGOS. That's because the spell proc event table that I was using was the older version, pre-classic, so it had higher proc per minute rates. Let me pop this open and let's see what's going on here. I actually don't know if I have a server running right now. I don't know what the deal is on this computer. I just built this computer, so I'm going to assume I don't have anything set up. That's fine. I don't need anything particularly, and I can get one spun up in like 2 seconds. So I thought I had one, though. I'll be frank there. I thought I had one set up. This would be for my database, and I'll have to take a look here. Oh, okay, I didn't. That's fine. I have it all set up on my server right now, so I can connect to my server session. In fact, I'm going to try that, but I actually don't think I have it set up for it right now, so it probably won't work. I think this was it. But that's fine if that's not the case, because next week we're going to be delving into that a little bit more. This week's focus is probably going to be a little bit more on the client itself, and we're going to go through the core. We'll talk about the database structures a lot more in depth next week for the server's database, but the client and the core are really what we're going to be gunning for. Can't remember the IP on this, but that's fine. Oh. 6.1. User. Try that. That probably ain't even gonna work. That's fine for now. I still have to get everything all set up, so by next month I'll have, you know, all the stuff already. So just built this new computer 2 days ago, and I'm still in the process of moving all this shit over. It's going to take a little while, so don't expect to be reviewing anything in high for today. If it's necessary, I'll just pull it up on my server. I won't be able to screen share it outside of screenshots, but that's fine. Not really too much of a concern. I could always remote connect into the server and then have that on stream, but I don't even want to bother with that. Correct, Farah. Just unzip that, and you'll see it within the same location. It'll be X. The folder will be X64. If you double-click it, you'll see MPQ Editor. Yeah, you're probably right. I should just spin this up real quick. I'm just going to make a new session, I guess. I'm going to need to get WAMP stack, though, is the problem. I have it on here somewhere. I just don't know. And that's something that I did want to talk about. For the last lesson that we had done, we had used a version of WAMP stack that wasn't really too friendly. It was the one posted on the website, but luckily I did find the installer for the exact version that I use that doesn't have the same issues with MySQL 5.6, so we're probably going to be using that moving forward. We'll rebuild the database next week and not have to worry about anything. So I want to find though where I had WAMP. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to find it. No, I got it. There we go. Alright. So let me get a database set up in SQL, and then we can browse it. It won't be the exact copy of the Wallcraft. Or it will be an exact copy, but not the live database. Alright, so for now what we're going to do is we're going to go back and we're going to pull up Lodix MPQ editor. We're going to do that by opening up our WoW vanilla client and double clicking on a patch. We're going to use patch 3, the Wallcraft patch for now for the example, and we're just going to review some of the stuff at the top here. You can create new MPQs using Lodix, but for now we're just going to focus on editing a pre-existing MPQ. When you create a new MPQ, you're going to have to do a few things really at first to get it set up and structured. Essentially, most important, you're going to need the list file and the attributes file correct, containing all the stuff, but this will auto-generate. There can be some issues sometimes with the list file not auto-generating, but this will contain all of the information for all the files within the client in a master list, and this is obviously what gets read by the client. That's like a reference list. The attributes, obviously, either you're not going to have to worry about. This will be auto-generated. You're not going to be able to read this. This is something you need to open up within a hex editor, or if you have some black magic program. So for now, we're going to take a look at the various files that are found within the Wallcraft patch and just kind of review them. And I'll talk about some of the changes that were made to make them and essentially how that works. So we're going to go through all of these, and we've already talked about the first two, the creature folders. These are all of the backported models that I've added into Wallcraft. They have to be structured within the exact form of this file structure for the client to read it properly. Essentially, if I had these files saved in a different path, they wouldn't work because the path itself is baked directly into the files. So this daemon form M2 file, it's recursively referencing itself within the file, and it needs the same file structure in order to do so, obviously. So when you create your MPQ, you're always going to want to use the exact same file structure. And we're going to go to the patch 2 later, but we're just going to keep browsing through here, and you'll see some of the new stuff. Jumping back up to the top bar, you can open more MPQs, you can lock MPQ, you can unlock MPQ. These buttons you aren't really going to need to touch. You don't really have to worry about locking an MPQ. Later on, you might, but that's not something for now. The biggest one here, and this is going to sound silly, is close MPQ. Do not X out your MPQ. Again, this is a packed file structure, so you don't want to have it generate incorrectly, and that can happen if you exit out. Always close the MPQ properly. Make sure you just click the button, it'll close the MPQ, and then you can exit out once everything's gone. So we're just going to reopen that, and you can open up files, you can open with, you'll have to add files to the client using this button. Most of these you're not going to need to know. You can extract from it, rename files, create folders, etc. Delete. The verify tables and set locales, those are a little bit more advanced. We're just going to talk about the basic stuff that we're really going to need to know. And going into the end, these are signatures and various things that you can add for integrity checks. You can set max file count, so it's predetermined, and I'm pretty sure the server can read max file count. So if somebody adds something into a patch or removes something from a patch, it'll be flagged or disallowed entirely. Same with signatures. That helps you verify that the MPQ is legitimate. MPQ files are generally safe, but again, they're a packed file structure, so it contains different things. And that's why I prefer to use a non-custom client, which is simply a custom MPQ, because anybody can go through and see exactly what's inside of it. So there's no, never a concern. Whereas a custom client, people like to joke around, but it is sad but true. It can happen. With a custom client, you don't really know what you're running. And, it could be a crypto miner. I think it's a meme for the most part when people say that, but, that's like, it's definitely the uncertainty and the risk of custom clients, which is why I prefer to just use the custom patch, because it's a lot more user-friendly and user-safe. So these will help you add integrity checks for your patch, and that's something that we're not going to need to touch on anytime soon, but just so you know that they're there. The last button, this will be a button that you will come to love and appreciate once you start really heavily editing and creating custom patches. Essentially, every time you save or close an MPQ or add or subtract anything to it, it is expanded. Even if you delete something, the MPQ might actually get bigger because of the way that it saves the information. It's a lot of math, but essentially the way that it functions with powers at 2, it will exponentially get bigger and bigger. This compact button will shrink the archive down back into a base size. It'll remove all of the essentially white space from the files. So this will save you a lot of heartache when your patch becomes 3 or 4 gigabytes, and it doesn't need to be that big. But for now, we're just going to go over the basics. We're just going to talk more a little bit about the file structure and go through some more of these. So heading back over here, we're going to talk about the DB files client. We talked about this earlier. This contains all of the DBCs within the custom patch that are used. The DBCs, again, are just tables that we can edit and browse with a DBC editor. And that's the next step that we're going to do, is get a DBC editor. And best one to use, WDBX editor. There are a few other options, but I would just definitely use this one. We can build it ourselves, or we can just find a version that's already made. Yeah, so we'll go to the releases, and this will have it already. Don't really need to build it ourselves. It doesn't get updated. Last update was 5 years ago. So let me post a link here in the Discord. And we're going to need everybody to download WDBX editor. This is what we're going to be using to edit our DBC files. This is going to take forever to transfer all this shit over. I really should just have pulled out the hard drive, put it in a new computer, but that's fine. Alright, so once we've got WDBX editor downloaded, we're going to find where it is. We're going to 7-zip extract here. And I'll actually need to refresh because Windows 10 is stupid. And it'll have extracted into a folder called x86. Or, I'm sorry, that's the storm lib. Definitions. Okay. I'm actually probably going to need to extract to a folder. There we go. Alright, so yeah, right-click 7-zip and extract to wdbx editor / just because it doesn't have a main directory here. I'm gonna get rid of all this shit. Actually, I hate Windows 10 so much, it's unbelievable. Like, just group all this shit together. I don't want to see different dates. Great. Alright. Yeah, so just, I'll worry about that later. Just extract to wdbx editor / with 7-zip, and then it'll create a parent directory. And then all you have to do is just double click, and boom, good to go. What we're going to do is we're going to actually just close this out. We're going to associate our DBC files with wdbx so that we can just double click them to open it. So now that we have that installed, in fact, I want to move this folder over to somewhere else. Move this to program files, maybe. Nah, screw it. Okay, I'm just going to keep it in downloads for now. Doesn't matter. But for now, what we're going to do is we're going to navigate to our client folder. And we're going to... I'm sorry. We're actually going to navigate to our server folder. So let me find that. So I'm going to go into Wallcraft Dev, whatever you named your server, be it VMaNGOS or whatever. And just pop that open. And we're going to go to our 5875 folder. That's the 1.12 client version number that we extracted all the DBCs from. And you'll see the DBC folder and the folder with all the DBCs. What we're going to want to do is right-click one of them and open with. Make sure that this is selected. Always use this. And we're going to look for the app that we just downloaded. That'll be wdbx editor. That's in my downloads. And just select the application, click open. That'll associate the file types with wdbx editor. Well, now that we've got a file attempting to be loaded with wdbx editor, we're going to see the first thing of note. It is the load definition dialog. Load definition indicates what version of the game client that we're trying to edit, because these tables change in structure between each different version. wdbx has built-in templates that indicate column names and various pieces of information within the file that wouldn't typically be present in just the raw form. Stuff like column names isn't saved actually within the tables because it's unnecessary. So with wdbx we can load the classic 1.12.1, which is vanilla, and we can see in the animation data DBC all of the rows and columns for animation. We're not going to be delving into this one too much. This is one that you'll very likely never change, but if you want to add custom animation kits, you're going to need to indicate them within this data table, the animation data DBC, and you'll create a new entry, create a listing, add the flags, weapon flag, body flag, flags, fallback animation. I believe that this is just a... No, this has to be... Yeah, this has to be some sort of flag. I don't think it's just an integer. And behavior ID. This is an integer. You can see non-power of 2 numbers. So more likely it is. So, again, this is a DBC that we're not going to be touching on. In order to keep it open or keep wdbx open while you're looking at the DBCs, you can just right-click down here in the browser and close them out individually. If you're done with them, you just close them out that way. And we're going to hit File and We're going to navigate to our server folder, the 5875 folder, and we're going to look through our DBCs, and we're going to pick one out that we actually will want to look at today and work on editing. So first one that we're going to do, obviously, it's the big one. And this is actually, I think, the biggest DBC. Yeah, spell. Spell is a very big DBC, and the reason for that is it has many, many entries with many, many columns. So you can see it's going to take a second to load. We're going to pull that up. Now, it gives us options for different client versions, of course, with load definition. And typically, when you're editing a vanilla client, you're going to use the 1.12, which is the one that it's structured for. There are some tables, though, that were created in alpha, and they'll need to be edited in alpha. They won't properly load within classic. There's few and far in between, but there are definitely some that will need to be worked on with the alpha templates instead of the classic ones. You'll know when you find them because they won't load with classic, or it'll load with an error. If you ever see an error when you're loading the definitions, then it's probably using an older alpha format that you'll have to pull up. Alright, and now that we've got WDBX loaded with our spell template, we're going to quickly take a look over it and give it a little bit of a description. But before we do that, we're going to take a 5-minute break. We'll meet back here at 3:15, and just make sure everybody's got all of their screens looking generally the same. Just get the spell DBC loaded. Make sure that you've got the definitions loaded properly. You should see all the column names at the top. If you don't see them, let me know in chat, and I'll help you adjust that. And we'll be back in 5 minutes for the lesson. Alright, we are back. I'm going to give everybody a minute to get reacclimated and adjusted. Let me take a look at the chat. Farah, what we're going to do right now is we're going to load spell templates from our server folder. So all you have to do is just do what I did and navigate to your server directory, which would be VMaNGOS or whatever. Mine is called Wallcraft Dev, and you'll see the 5875 folder that you had extracted from the client. Last week or last month, we had run extractors on the client, and this is one of the folders that we had obtained from the client. It's the 5875 folder, and this contains all of the, let me go back to it. The 5875 folder contains all of the DBCs, the database files that were pulled from the client. So we're going to navigate to our server directory, 5875 DBC. We're going to go down to the spell DBC, and we're going to double click that. If you've associated the file type, which is just automatically open with WDBX. If not, it'll prompt you to select WDBX application to open it. And then select 1.12 client definitions. No, it is not in your data file. Your data file is within your client. We're not in the client, we're in the server. So you're going to want to navigate over to your server that you had built. Yeah, and once you're there, you'll be able to see this 5875 folder. Just click that, and go into DBC, and then you'll see all the DBC files. Just load up the spell one. Okay, 5875. Yeah, if you take a look at my screen, you'll see. For you, it'll be whatever the drive that you are using. Obviously, your server folder, 5875 DBC. I don't know where I put my lighter. One second. Oh, that would be much appreciated, but I'm actually just going to run my thing real quick. I'm just going to build it again. I have the full install from Wallcraft when I transferred it. So I'm just going to have to pull that over. What did I do? Yeah, double click 5875. There you go. Yeah, perfect. Now, project game client. You're still in the wrong one, Farrell. If you look at the directory, you're within your game client. Yeah, Farah, go back up to Farah server. At the top, Farah, click on Farah server and post a screenshot of whatever's in there. I'll tell you where to go. Kaladar is actually available on Wallcraft right now. It's the original alpha one though, so it's nothing super fancy. It's just a big like empty battleground. Okay. And I'm actually going to need to reinstall this. So, which I really don't want to. There's no point. In fact, let me just get this done right, so I don't have to worry. And I might actually need some help from you, Plax, on this. Let me see. What did I do? Okay. 1 second. I got my server sitting over here. I'm messing around on that. Let's see. You probably go to J. Yeah, if your server's in J, then you're in the wrong drive, Farah. Go to your J drive into your server. Yeah. You're trying to go to your server. All the shit that we installed last month, whatever folder that is, just go there. Plax, if you want to help me out real quick, I've got my database obviously all set up on my server, sitting right next to me. I want to connect into it, but I'm having some issues. I'm getting error code 160, I think it was. Heidi. Yeah, failure to connect. I think it's a firewall issue, but honestly, it's Windows 10. I have no fucking idea what I'm doing. Apologies for the profanity, but I swear a lot, so... Yeah, there you go. Yeah, and then click on 5875 into DBC, and you'll see all your stuff. Oh, solid. Plax, do you know what the issue is with the 160? Pretty sure it's a firewall, but like I can't connect to my own server from remote. Maybe I just got the domain wrong. I'm not really certain. Jeez. Solid. Much appreciated. Yeah, let me try real quick. Session. Farah, go to the... Okay, so you're in the right spot. If you just right-click on one of those and then hit open with, it'll give you the... Or double-click it. It'll give you the prompt to select the program you want to edit it with. You're going to select WDBX. Yeah, this was the error code I was getting. You can see it on screen. I'll post that. Yeah, I haven't gotten it all configured yet. I figured I'd get that done this week, but... No, Farah. Don't touch... Yeah. Okay, so just hit open, and it'll prompt for a program. Just click open, and then select WDBX. Either way, Plax provided us with a session. Let me try this again. Yeah, Plax provided us with a session we can use, though, for the example here. But I definitely need to get this all set up. Yeah, the IP's right. I mean, it's got to be a firewall issue. Honestly, I just got Windows 10 this week, and I've never used Windows 10. I fucking hate it. Alright, I'm gonna turn off the firewall real quick. Okay, well, disabling firewall give me a different error now. That's funny. Yeah, my SQL's running on my server. I'm currently on my desktop. Disabling the firewall leads us to the next error code, which means it's just not listening. I'm not going to worry about it right now. I'm just glad to know that Windows 10 firewall is actually the root of the problem here. So we've moved past the other error code. So that's a concern for later today, not right now. We're just going to use the session that Plax provided. We're going to connect. We're going to connect to our servers that we installed last month in Heidi, and we're going to take a look at the VMaNGOS database. And this will have many tables that are mirrors of the DBCs that we're taking a look at in the client. Again, many of them don't exist in the client. Many in the client don't exist on the server. Any of these tables that exist in both client and server should always be edited in 3 different places. And regardless of which ones are existing, they should always be edited in these 3 locations. And that would be the database within Heidi. That would be within the server folder, the 5875 folder, and all of these DBCs should be edited because some of them are read by the server, of course. And then within the client, which is what we'll be making with the patch editor, or Lotix MPQ editor. So for now, we're just going to open up our spell template. Make sure everybody's on the same page here. Alright, Farah, so you need to navigate when you try and open it with WDBX. Okay, well, you can open it within WDBX. So just go to DBC and go up one directory. Go up one directory. If not, you can just pick... oh, you don't have the English one there. Yeah, what is yours? Pretty sure yours is up one directory. You'll have ENUS. 3 Chimes asks, what is forbidden items? Forbidden items are items that are disallowed. You can quickly add items to a disallowed list by just adding them to forbidden items within your server. This is a table that exists server-side only, and you'll see that these items listed, you'll have the item ID, so 20725 would be an item that is not allowed before patch 6. So the 1 in the after or before indicates before, a 0 would be after, and patch 6. So this item is introduced in patch 6, and if somebody manages somehow to cheat the item into the game, the server will see it on this table and just automatically delete it. So that can happen very rarely, usually with like some holiday crap. But it's a table that is used to restrict items in a very direct way. And there's a few different ones that are forbidden tables. There's a forbidden spells table. There's, in fact, let me see. Spell disabled actually is what it's called. It's generally the same thing though. If you go to spell disabled table in Heidi, you'll see there's 2 spells that are currently disabled on the server. One of them is, I think it's the Orc Pet Racial, and that's because within the client it's actually an activatable ability that triggers when you have a pet. That's how the spell functions, but because it's an activatable ability, you can actually cast the ability yourself, which obviously you're not supposed to be able to do. So the spell disabled table has it as an entry to prevent the player from casting it, but they'll still gain the effect. Spells listed within spell disable cannot be triggered by players. GM accounts can trigger them, and I can't remember what the other one is, 21563. We can take a look at the template though, find it. Pretty sure it's like, it's not Curse of Doom, but it's something like that. Okay, no, that's the Orc Command Racial, and the other one was 3602, so we're going to look that up in the spell template. And you don't need to be clicking on any of this, just follow along. Just taking a look here. I have 3 mice on my desk because I'm not using a remote connection for my server and my other stuff. So I have 3 mice and 2 keyboards. And I keep getting them mixed up. It's getting really frustrating. Eventually I'll have them all figured out. But Torch Burst. Okay, so there's another spell called Torch Burst that you probably can cast. And either it's got a bug or it's not intended to be cast by players but somehow can. So it's added to the spell disabled. This is one of those tables that Britannia would look at and say, I don't like it, this shouldn't exist. Because it doesn't really need to, but it's a convenience thing. So it exists because it's very easy to just add stuff to like forbidden tables and stuff. And I'm not going to put words in his mouth, but that's generally a lot of the sentiment for different things that exist in other emulators that don't particularly need to exist. Farah has the multi-language DBC because I believe that he just pulled the 5875 from VMaNGOS Bro Pack, which contains all locales. So all the DBCs are combined. If you want to have them appear in the other locales, obviously you'll need to add it to that, and then change the language masks and whatnot. But I wouldn't worry about that. If you're going the way of a custom server, you can do locales, but that's a ton of work, and generally you're not gonna need it. If I were to do alternate locales, I would probably focus mainly on languages that the people who speak it cannot read English. The Portuguese one is technically custom, same with the Russian, and the Chinese is an official client one, but unless you speak Chinese, there's really no point trying to do that. Yeah, typically you don't open files directly from WDBX. You just double click them within the folder, and since the file's associated with WDBX, it loads in there. But for now, we're going to go back to our spell template. Now that everybody's on the same page, we've got this all loaded, and this is our spell DBC file loaded up within WDBX. This is a mirror of the spell template that's within our server. So this database file exists in 3 different places, in 3 different forms essentially. It exists within our database that we can browse within Heidi. It exists within our server, DBC folder, and it exists within the client directly, which we can view with the patch, Lattice MPQ patch editor. So we're going to keep this open right now, and what we're going to do is we're going to actually leave this in here. As I said, we typically don't open DBCs from the patch. What we do is we edit them within the server and then load that DBC into the patch so that there's a level of redundancy without any confusion. You can do it backwards if you wanted to edit it for some reason within the patch and then put it on the server, but Lattice does not open directly the files within here. It will create a copy in a new folder, and then that needs to be loaded into the patch. So never ever try and edit the stuff in here. You're basically just loading stuff into it. But this needs to be a copy of what's on the server. Otherwise, the client won't see it. The server will still handle it, but the client won't see it. And sometimes that's alright, sometimes it's not alright. It really just depends on the use and the situation. There's a few DBCs that, although they exist and are used in the client, the server has control. So one example of that you'll use very likely at some point in the future is world safe locations. This is graveyard locations, and this information is stored within the client, so we can see it within the patch 3 for Wallcraft. Because I've edited this table, I've added several new graveyards to the game for new zones and stuff. Like Ashara's Crater doesn't have battleground graveyards established in the client, so they needed to be added. There's like predetermined spots within the map that are obviously intended for a graveyard, but it was never finished, so that data doesn't exist within the client. But it doesn't need to, because the server handles your teleportation upon death to the graveyard, and it'll handle where the graveyard should be located within the game. So having it within the client is just a bit redundant, but the client does contain that information. So we'll just keep going over the tables and getting everybody acclimated, but for now we're just going to focus on spell template. This is a DBC file that exists in Heidi, it exists in your server directory, and it exists in your client. So the 3 different places, and it's kind of like a trinity of files that all need to be aligned and the same in order to properly work. If there's any variation, they'll still work, but they won't work correctly. Something will change. So for now, we're just going to go over some of the columns and talk about the different fields within spell template. By the end of the lesson, I want to basically give everybody a homework assignment where for next month's lesson, I want everybody to show up with a new custom created spell. And if you obviously you're working on it over the next coming month, just DM me on Discord if you run into a snag or need help. I'm more than happy to help you. So we're going to get everybody to create their own new custom spell that they can use on their server and make it your own, whatever you want to make, you know, however creative you want to get. There's an infinite world of possibilities, restricted only by the limits of the client, which can be pushed, but we'll talk about that later. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about the columns. Now, in databases, obviously you have columns and you have rows. Column indicates the data that should be inside of the present cell, and a cell is just a single box. A row would be the entire row, and the column would be everything obviously going vertically. So for the spell template, you'll see with a comparison for the database client files that there's actually a few extra columns that aren't present within the client. These columns are used by the server, so you're not going to see them like the build column. You're not going to see this within the client. It's going to be different for the WDBX version of it, but this information is used by the server to determine what client this spell exists from. The build number, again, directly indicates the client version that this spell was taken from, and all of the spells in here are taken directly from the client. Very, very few have any edits or additions made, because the goal of the VMaNGOS project is to, you know, obviously preserve the integrity So if there's anything that does need to be changed or added, it's very rarely, and Britannia is trying to move everything away from this, but if there's anything that needs to be changed or edited, there's two different tables that also exist simultaneously that have edits made to these spells. And that way you don't have to touch the original data. You can preserve the client data and have it match to the spell DBC within your spell template and still have the ability to add or change effects depending on the need. The general premise is that the information within the client is accurate and the server should function in a way that makes it work accurately. So the assumption obviously is that all of these spells are correct, and if something doesn't work correctly, it's because the server doesn't handle it correctly. That's not always the case. I think Blizzard did have some sort of table like spell mod or spell effect mod, something of a similar nature that was able to hold additional information, because there are some spells that are just like they wouldn't function without that information, and the information is not present in the client, so obviously it's being handled somewhere else server side. And all of these would be considered custom because they're custom additions to the spells or edits. That's why this will have a comment field within the spell mod table, kind of indicating what it does. And if you see, most of them are actually written in French. This is because this is pioneered by a lot of people from France who were working on the Nostalrius project. So that's really where the root of all of this is. So you're going to have to become very, very acclimated to using Google Translate. Just double-click, copy, paste, and run it through a translator. As I work progressively through Warcraft, anytime I encounter a translation that I need to do, I always save it with the English version, and then slowly over time it'll become English. A lot of people have complained in the past that it's difficult to read some of the stuff because obviously it's printed in French, and they have to use translation software for it. But it is in the spirit of the original, developers who did a lot of this work. They don't feel bad if you're changing it, but it's not a necessity. Anybody can just translate it easily, and it's all very clear and very well written. But that's neither here nor there. We're going to be talking about the spell template, and then in referencing spell template, we talked about spell mod and spell effect mod. But we're going to go back to spell template and just ignore any of these two different tables. These two tables essentially contain the columns split between both of them. But we're just going to be talking about the original client spells that match within WDBX that we'll see here. So going through the columns, we're going back to Heidi, and again we reference that the client build number indicates where the spell was taken from. 5302 would have been patch, I think, 11. It would have been patch 1.11, I should say, not 1.12, 1.11, or 1.10, one or the other. I can't remember which exact one it is. But we'll see that for this search, let's say we just search, let's search a spell here. We're just going to do Mocking Blow. We picked Mocking Blow because it's a very clear name. There's probably not a whole lot of spells named Mocking Blow. And we'll see different types and different versions of the spells within our spell template when we scroll over to where the names are. But for now, we're just going to be focusing on the Mocking Blow spell itself. And the first thing that we want to do is typically sort by build. So you click on the build column, and we're going to click it twice so the arrow's pointing down. That will sort all of the spells primarily as the first sorting method by build number. And the reason that we do this is that these spells, you'll see 694 as the spell entry. This is Mocking Blow rank 1. The reason that we do this is because these spells are just multiple versions of the same spell that have changed throughout different client versions. So if we're editing a spell, we don't need to edit the older versions. If there's a duplicate version that's present in an older version, we don't particularly need to edit it. And this is not affected by what patch your server is on. This is entirely based around what client your server was built for. So when we originally defined the client build within CMake as 1.12, we're using the latest versions of these spells because 1.12 is the last official client, so it'll be the last build number 5875. Some people get confused by this. They see all of these and they think, well, my client 5875 doesn't exist, so does the spell not exist? Well, the server takes the newest version, and whatever is the newest version is the one that is used. So if there was only one version of 694 and it was from the original 1.1 or 1.2 client, I think this is 1.2 client 4222. If this was the only version of it, it would still be the one that's used because it's the newest version. If there's a newer version, this one does not get used. Totally ignored for the newer version. So the newest version, 4695, would be the one that we want to take a look at here. And that's why we sort by build. And we're going to do a secondary sort as well. So click on the entry column. And we're going to leave that arrow pointing up, and you'll see the little 2. And that's the second sorting method that we've established, and this is sorting entry from lowest to highest. So this just keeps it neat and clean as we work with the spells, because right here we can see that these are going to be the first 5 ranks of Mocking Blow. And if we go all the way over and scroll over to the name column, we can see Mocking Blow and the name subtext rank 1 through 5. Now, there's only 5 versions of Mocking Blow, 5 different ranks within vanilla. So these are the 5 that are being used on Wallcraft. Let me find it. Now, we're not going to edit any of these. I was actually wondering for a quick second why Mocking Blow is different. I forgot I'm not actually on Wallcraft server. I'm on the test by the Plaque setup. So we're not going to do any type of editing on these, obviously. I just had to be confused for a second there. Let me take a look through the chat real quick. Alright, Farah asks, well, explain what ID is. It's just numbers, not names of NPCs or spells or whatever we load. Okay, so ID column and Heidi, you'll see entry for spell template instead of ID. This is just the entry for the spell, the unique identifier for it. You can see the primary key within this table is entry and build, and that means that these numbers must be unique and that they are referenced elsewhere. So if we had something in spell learn spell and it said the spell 694, that would be Mocking Blow rank 1, because that is the entry number for 694, and it would be referenced in that table. Farah asks, my server is in C file? No, your client is in C file. Your server is in J, VMaNGOS file. VMaNGOS is your server. Farah, your Elysium game client folder contains your video game client. Your VMaNGOS folder contains your server. Let's see. Farah asks, well, so entry is the spell name and number code? Correct. Yes. Sometimes you'll see entry, sometimes you'll see ID. It depends on the table and really what's referenced. There's a proper way to do it all, but that's primarily that's chosen by standards and practices, and where those don't exist, they're chosen by what's logical, and if there's multiple choices on that, then Britannia just picks whatever's most convenient. So that's and that really is the best way to do it. That keeps uniformity over the entirety of the project and makes sure that things don't radically change where they don't need to. And if anything's, you know, unnecessary, it'll be removed. That's a big part of VMaNGOS, is golfing down the database and the code and the core to make it as efficient as possible. Now, something I've considered myself and for Wallcraft is that since I will never ever use older client version on Wallcraft, I actually don't need all of these older versions of the spells. I could go through manually and clean up all the older versions, but that would be a lot of work for not a whole lot of results. There's really no point in not having them. If I had it all said and done, it definitely would save me time in the future for convenience sake, because I wouldn't have to be sifting through extra data that I don't need, but that's something neither here nor there. So for now, we're going to go jump back into the column names, and we're just going to go all the way down through the list. You'll see it within your spell template that it's got a lot of columns. If I scroll all the way through, this contains a lot of data on all of these spells. And this is 30-something thousand, about 25 or 30,000 total rows inside this table. So we have it filtered down by mocking blow, but there's a lot of information in this table. Once you have an idea of what the columns are, though, you'll kind of understand what you're doing. So going back to the columns, the column after build is school, and if you scroll over it, you can actually see that in the setup of the table, it references resistances DBC. Now school enumerates to a set of like 6 or 7 numbers that it can possibly be. This indicates what school the spell is from, and we can find that information in our solution file if we open that up, and we're actually going to do that real quick, and hopefully it'll be quick. We'll find out. Let's see. Actually, I don't even know if I have Visual Studio installed on this. I might have to... Yeah, 1 second. This shouldn't take too long, but hopefully I don't need a restart. Yeah, I know I'm woefully underprepared for today's lesson, but if I hadn't pushed off the tournament, I wouldn't even have built the new server this week. So that was a whole day effort. So I'm going to run the installer for Visual Studio. You don't need to be doing any of this. Obviously, you've already got this all installed, but it should hopefully be very quick. My internet speeds have multiplied tenfold ever since I've hardwired the server in. I moved my router directly over to my server room too, so I don't need a wireless bridge or anything. It's very nice, I'll tell you that. I don't need Clang. Take all of them. Yeah, okay, so this is probably going to take a little while. It probably won't take too long, but... Oh no, that's lightning fast. Oh my god, my internet's so fast now. It feels good, man. This would have been maybe 2 megabytes a second before, if I was lucky. Yeah, so just let this run for a second. And once we get this all run, we're going to open our solution file. And in fact, I could do it in the meantime just using Notepad, which I will. Don't worry about opening any of these. I'm just going to open this header file in Notepad++. And this contains all the same stuff that's in your solution file. This will be, let's see, Frost. Search Frost. Okay, so we search spell defines, which is a header file located within your server core, and it'll be in your solution file. If you open up your solution file, go to your, just a quick instruction in case you don't know how to do it, go to your server directory, and go to build, and you'll see mangos.sln, that's your solution file. Just double click that. If it prompts for what version, use the newest version, whatever you got installed for Visual Studio, open it up. And then in the search box on the right, in the right column there, the right pane there, you'll see a search bar. Just type in spell defines, and you'll see a file on the solution called spelldefines.h. It'll be somewhere where my mouse is over here for the search bar. You just search spell defines, and you'll see the header file. Just double click it, and it'll pull it open in your solution browser. Then within spell defines, you'll see a lot of information that enumerates all of the different things that are used within the spell templates. So things like spell targets, spell miss info, how it should reflect and miss for the core, the spell hit types, damage class, prevention types. Since we're looking over the template right now, we're just going to be focusing on the information as it presents itself one by one. So, find previous. So spell schools. And we go back to the spell template, and you can see the school column. It's referenced in resistances DBC, but there's also enumerations within the core, obviously, because the core is what handles it. So if we look at the spell schools within the core, the spell defines file, we'll see that school normal is 0, holy is 1, fire 2, nature 3, frost 4, shadow 5, arcane 6. There's 7 max spell schools, 0 through 6, and that definition exists just to make sure that that doesn't push past the upper bounds, otherwise it would cause a crash. And I believe that a mask is created off that. I'm not too certain on that. But there is spell school masks actually right here that indicate the different spell school masks that you'll see within the core for the flag. And this operation shifts it to the right, so whatever the flag for 1, it would shift to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if you are converting it from decimal to hex, you can just use this. But the template references those enumerations, just the basic integers. And for all of these spells, obviously these are all mocking blow. You'll see that the school is 0. The spell always has a school. If it's defined as 0, it means it's physical. Mocking blow is a physical spell. If we were to search a spell like Holy Strike, we would see that the school would be 1, and this would indicate that it's a holy spell. And the game will, well, the server will handle that spell based on the school, obviously. So if it's a holy spell, it'll take into account any of the modifiers and stuff automatically. Going back to mocking blow, though, for the example. Going through the columns, we've done entry, build, school. Category column was the 4th column. Category indicates what cooldown category the spell will use and what category the spell exists in. If it has a category of 40 and your spell category of 40 is currently on cooldown or locked out because of an interrupt, you won't be able to cast this spell. Depending on the things. Interrupts obviously will use mostly school, but they can, I believe, use category. Regardless, though, this controls the cooldown categories for the spell. Cast UI column, the 5th column, indicates what type of UI is used with the cast. Spells that are like crafting spells that might open up an additional interface, or I think tame your pet beast skills as a hunter. You're given your own spell book for the pets. Well, it's a spell that when you click on it, it will open up a cast UI, as indicated in here. And the cast UIs can be seen within the definitions if we search the solution. Once I have this all installed, I can just do a global search for the cast UI and see what the enumerations are. The enumerations are going to be the listings for them all. Alright, we're back, people. I'm terribly sorry. I closed out my browser and I've been rambling for like a hot minute. So, let's see where we are at. What was the last column that you heard me talking about before I dropped the ball there? Was it resistances? Locking blow? How long have I been out of the call? Okay, school types, okay. Did you hear me talking about any of this stuff in the header file? Okay. So I'm installing Visual Studio right now so we can continue with the lesson, but I've just got the header file pulled up in Notepad. What we're going to want to do is open up your solution file so that we can do a search for the enumerations listed. But for now, while I get this installed, we're just going to take a look at my screen here. So we're going through the columns here, and the third column, as indicated, is for spell schools. Spell schools are referenced within Resistance's DBC, but obviously since they're handled server side, the server is the thing handling all of the information about that, it's going to be defined within somewhere in the core, and that would be in spelldefines.h, your header file for your spell defines. You can find that within your solution file by searching your solution. The way that you do that is just open up your server, go to the build folder, and then double-click VMaNGOS.sln. That'll open up your solution file within Visual Studio. And then on the right-hand side, you can just search spelldefines.h, and you'll see the file. Just double-click to open it, and you'll have what I'm looking at here open up in Visual Studio. Now, again, the third column here is school. This indicates what type of school the spell exists in. Mocking Blow is a physical spell, so the spell school would be indicated as normal, and you'll see a 0 in that field for physical armor, normal spells that are physical. Since Mocking Blow is physical, it'll have a spell school of 0. If we were to take a look at a holy spell like Holy Strike, you'll see that the school is 1. That is because Holy Strike is a holy spell. Any of the schools like Fireball would be 2, Entangling Roots would be 3, Frostbolt 4, Shadow Word Pain would be 5, Arcane Missiles would be 6. Then there's 7 max school types, 0 through 6. So whatever the value is in there, it can be referenced within the spell defines. And that's where we're going to be taking a look at once we get the solution file open, is spell defines. Header file contains most of the definitions that we're going to be referencing within this template, or this table exactly. But going back to spell template, we're going to be taking a look at all of the columns here, going down the list one by one, as far as we can get today. The fourth column indicated is category. Category is a column that references spell category, DBC, which we can find within our database folders within our server. So we go to our server. Again, we can just open it within WDBX or directly within the folder, just double click it. We're going to go down to the spell category DBC, and we're going to double click to open it. I'm going to select the classic 1.12.1 version, and then you'll see it opened up in the browser, and then we have to double click on it to switch to it. Categories are all listed here, and these are original client categories as they're listed. Now, it only has the ID and the flags that it has associated with it. Only a few categories have specific flags, and we can take a look at the flag listing for spellcategory.dbc. And to do that, honestly, we're going to need to Google it. I'd like to move all the information directly into the core, but unfortunately it doesn't exist there currently. So the best place is the WoW Dev Wiki or whatever website will have information. We're just going to Google spellcategory.dbc. And wowdev.wiki has the spell category DBCs page, and it's going to talk about the different flags. What we're interested in finding out is the flags for spell categories, because the spell categories are being referenced within the spell template. Mocking Blow has a category of 40, which very likely doesn't have any flags, so this is just a basic category. If it doesn't have flags, it's a cooldown category that is shared with whatever spells are in that cooldown. Mocking Blow on Wallcraft shares cooldown with Revenge and Overpower. So all three different warrior stance-specific DPS spells that have a 6-second cooldown. Mocking Blow functions like Revenge and Overpower on Wallcraft. In Vanilla, you're not going to see the same information in this default template. But as an example, Mocking Blow, I changed the category to the same as Revenge and Overpower. So that means if I cast Mocking Blow, Revenge, or Overpower, if I cast any of those three spells, all three of them will go on cooldown because they all share a category. Now, going back to the spell categories, the information that's referenced within this template, you don't need to obviously know the exact information, you just need to know what is the right information, essentially. So for the spell categories, the flags are mostly irrelevant unless you're looking to find something specific. But if we take a look here at spell category DBC, we can see listings for flags. Now this is from TBC Classic, that's where the information was pulled from, but very likely it matches the exact same. They don't typically tend to change the functions of flags throughout the versions, the first few versions at least. They just would add a new one. So we can see that the only flags that we're really seeing are 1 and 2. That's the only ones that have caught my eye on this. So these categories would have one that has one flag would modify items which have the category, and this is very likely for a category that's used for anathema and benediction. That means that this flag existing on this category, in fact if I look up anathema or benediction, it's probably category 170, and I'll do that real quick to see if I'm right. Anathema. Nope. Okay, so it has a different category, but if we were to, let's run a query here, select from spell template, and just follow along, you don't have to do any of this. Select from, select all from spell template, where category equals, what was that category? 170. So we'll find all spells that have category 170 here. And actually there are none. So there are no spells that have category 170. So this one's not currently used in vanilla. Could very well be used in TBC later on, but exists as an within the vanilla game client files. 351, we'll take a look at another category that has a different flag. Okay, so we have a few that are 351, and if we look at the flag, cooldown is global, meaning when this spell is used, it will put everything on cooldown for a global cooldown duration. So let's see what that is. Okay, so yeah, spells that are shoot or shoot, bow, gun, throw, any of the shooting spells, when they activate, they have a category that is flagged 351. It's flagged to put everything on a global cooldown once it pops off. So you'll see that in game as a hunter if you're shooting or you auto shoot, or even as a warrior or rogue, you just use the bow spells. It'll put everything on cooldown as a global cooldown, which is 1.5 seconds as defined. It can change depending on what it is. You'll see different category recovery time columns, and we'll get to those later. But this is the column that indicates the category of the spell. And we're going to move on to the next one, Cast UI. Now, Cast UI, the fifth column, is for spells that pull up a special UI. Typically this isn't used for most spells. One example of it is the Hunter's Pet Training spell. You click on it and it opens up a spell book. Well, it's a spell that opens the spell book. The Tame Beast, whatever, the Pet Training one. When you click it, it opens up the Cast UI. And that Cast UI would be indicated here with a number that would be referenced somewhere within your solution here. So let me pull this up now. We've got it installed and we can actually search for it. Again, we're going to be opening up our solution file. All set. And in order to do so, if you haven't already done that, just navigate to your server directory, go into the build folder, and then double click mangos.sln file, or you'll see Mangos. It's a Microsoft Visual Studio solution file. Okay, I've got my solution opening up for Wallcraft. Okay. Now that we've got this all loaded, I'm going to show you real quick, of course, that spell defines opening it within the solution. Just search spell define. And you'll see spell defines.h. This is the header file. Cannot open file. Nice. Lovely. Well, that's how you'll open it there. Not really certain why. I probably need to clean the solution or something. Probably actually can't open anything. That's fine. It's because I just installed Visual Studio and I haven't targeted the solution for anything. In fact, I'll probably need to install CMake and regenerate the solution. I'm not worried about that right now, so because we're not going to really be messing around with any of the stuff in our core here. I don't know how this one's open though. No, well, I've already got it open, it seems, so not a worry there. So we'll search for categories. Now, we're going to search categories in our spell defines. You'll see it at the bottom. These are the spell categories column that we were just talking about. When we're looking at it in WDBX, it just has the entry listed by the ID. Within the core, it has the enumerations for all the names. And if you see its original names, do not edit. I'm pretty sure Battalion left this note because this is the names actually used within the client. I want to say the information was found when Classic was launched. These are very likely original names. So if we go through all of these, we can see what kind of spell will use the category, like spell category, item, bandage. Most bandage items you'll see will have a category of 150. Global cooldown is category 133. Discipline would be, I believe, pre-spells from the discipline school. And most spells might not have the correct category as listed by the name. This is basically a general overview. Like Lightning Shield would very likely have category 371, Inner Rage 350, etc. But you might have like Pyroblast Reuse. So this might not be assigned to a spell. This might just be a blank category that exists within the client. Might not be used though. You don't need to worry about the website right now, Farah. You can just see it on the screen. It's wowdev.wiki. I'll post the link though for you. Let me read through the chat. We're actually going to take a 5-minute break. I'd really like to smoke and get a drink. And then we'll come back and we'll continue on. Right now we left off at the cast UI column. Again, this is just for spells that pull up a UI. It'll indicate which UI is used. If you go through the columns, you'll understand what most of them mean. Dispel would be what type of dispel can dispel the spell. So if it's like a curse, it would have a dispel type of like 6 or 7, which would indicate curse. In fact, if we search dispel, let's see. Okay, so if we go into our spell defines, dispel. Spell dispel type is enumerated within our spell defines header file. And if it was, let's say, Curse of Exhaustion, it would have a dispel curse, so dispel type of 2. And that tells the server what kind of spell is needed to dispel it. So a lot of the column names, they're pretty straightforward, and you'll find all of the information for their enumerations listed within spelldefines.h. We'll talk more about the core structure later, but for now it's going to be mostly focused on just the databases. They're very easy to edit. You don't really need to know a whole lot. As long as you just kind of follow along, you'll be able to figure it out and edit it. Once we start delving into the core, this obviously involves C++, which is a bit more advanced, but a lot of it is basic and easy to read. So Big thing that we're going to want to focus on for the core right now is just the header files, which offer definitions and enumerations. There's many, and we'll take a look at more of them in the future, but for now, just put our focus into the database. Now we're going to take a 5-minute break. We'll reconvene at 4:20, and just can continue forward with going through the columns here. So everybody take 5 here. Alright, we're still on break, but I'm back. I'm just going to read through the chat and answer some questions. Farah asks what a flag is. A flag is a hexadecimal enumeration that is converted to a decimal format. And you'll find them within your templates often used. One example that we looked at was spell category. The flag is converted to decimal, but it is a hexadecimal number. So we'll need to convert those. Well, we'll get into that later on. For now, we're just going to be going over the basics. 3 Chimes asked if you can shorten the global cooldown. Yes, global cooldown is assigned individually on each spell. So if you want a specific spell to have a shorter or shortened global cooldown, you just change the number in the category cooldown. You'll see at the end of the spell template, at the end you'll see start recovery category and start recovery time. For most spells, you'll see 133, which is global cooldown category, and start recovery category time would be 1500, which is 1.5 seconds. Those are 1,500 milliseconds. If you wanted to lower or remove global cooldown, you would just change those numbers. If you wanted to remove it, just remove both of them, or you can just lower start recovery time. Farah says, I don't know what my core is. Your core is your server. Like, your server itself is colloquially known as core. You can call it server, you can call it core, you can call it engine, it's all the same. Farah asks how I got to that page. We opened up that file, the spell defines header file. So, Farah, you want to go to your server core, which is in your J drive. It's the same place that we were showing you how to open up your DBC folder. So you go to your server file, and instead of clicking on 5875, we're going to click on build, and we're going to open up our solution file. And this is the solution file that we had compiled into the server core. So just double click on that, and you'll pull up the solution file. I'm actually going to need to retarget this solution. I'm going to get CMake while we're still on break here. Break is ending, but just making sure everybody's all wrapped up here. So I'll just ignore this while I download CMake. It would be called VMaNGOS. Just post a screenshot of whatever you're seeing. I'll tell you what's up. Okay, what the fuck is going on? What I'm going to do right now for myself is, because I just moved everything over, the paths are not correct. So I'm just generating a new solution file so I can actually work with this stuff. Oh, that's so annoying. Okay, whatever. CMake. And I'm going to find my source code. Core. And build in the build folder. Figure. Project files might be invalid. What? I might have to delete cache. There we go. Okay. It's probably because I don't have system paths assigned. Yeah, for TBB or Ace. Lovely. Oh, I know I got him. And it's probably still transferring TBB. That's fine though. No. Alright, let that run. Do I have TBB? Let me reload CMake. If it's throwing more errors, I'm just going to ignore it. Because we don't particularly need it this week, but it would be helpful. Everything will be set up by next lesson, so then moving forward we won't have these issues. Core build. There we go. Alright, generated a new solution file. And we are going to then go to our build folder and close this one out. Alright, now I should be able to do global searches. So going back to the spell template where we left off at the dispel column. Again, we're just going to keep going through these columns, and most of them are very simple, so won't require much explanation. But moving on, the next column that we're going to be examining is mechanic. Spells have mechanics. Some spells do, some spells don't. As you see, Mocking Blow doesn't have any specific mechanics. But if we open up our solution file, we can go to our spell defines, and we're going to search with Control F, mechanic, and somewhere inside of here. Mechanic. And this will be the enumeration for all spell mechanics. So we'll go through our solution file for spell defines. Again, if you... Let me check the chat real quick. Somebody's pinging. Yes, Farah. It should open up Visual Studio. So once you have your solution file, all you got to do is just search spell defines over here, and you'll see it. Just double click it, and it'll pull it up. Right now we're looking at the enumeration for spell mechanics. If a spell has a specific mechanic, one of these that's in the list here, such as distract, fear, root, pacify, silence, stuns, freezes, etc., it'll be listed in here. These are all the default Blizzard ones that are used, and then there is one that is technically custom. It's for Cursive Tongues, slow cast speed. And this will be referenced elsewhere within the core. And big help here when working with these files, you want to work with them in the Visual Studio IDE, because you'll have access to things like being able to find all references. So if I right-click on slow cast speed, which would be a custom one, but obviously handled the same way, we can find all references, and we can see where that is referenced in the code. So if there is any references for it, and it doesn't seem to be referenced directly, so what we can do, just to make sure, is hold Control, hold Shift, and then hit F while we have it selected, and that will pull up a Find in Files search function. And this will search the entire solution for us, for any of the file types, excluding these types. So we're going to search mechanic slow cast speed. Just follow along, you don't have to do this yourself, but I'm just showing you a way to find referenced functions. So it doesn't seem to be referenced elsewhere, except for the spell defines that we're looking at right now. And same probably isn't said for everything, but that's because that is a custom. So we can see mechanic knockout. We do a right click, find all reference for mechanic knockout, and we can see that it is referenced within the game files and within the script. So if we click on that, we can see where some of the mechanics are referenced, and we go through the core and see exactly what this is talking about. And this is for diminishing returns. So this is where the core would handle diminishing returns, and you can see that the mechanic for all of these things are referenced within specific categories. If the mechanic is a mechanic of stun, it will return it, whether or not it's a triggered stun or a controlled stun. So you'll see that example happen within default vanilla gameplay. If you have a class like a paladin who can use a controlled stun, like Hammer of Justice, it will have its own separate diminishing return from a triggered stun like Seal of Justice's stun proc. If you proc Seal of Justice multiple times, it won't diminish the cooldown for Hammer of Justice, or vice versa. That's because these stuns, despite both being stuns, have two different types of categories within their mechanics, and this is referenced within the core over here. But for now, we're just going to focus on the basic mechanics. Obviously, Mocking Blow that we're looking at. Actually, let me pull back up Mocking Blow. Where the hell is my multi-fill? Oh, data. Duh. So we're going to pull back up Mocking Blow. And you can see Mocking Blow doesn't have any mechanics. If it did a stun, it would have a mechanic listing of whatever stun, perhaps even knockout. But as it doesn't, it has a mechanic of 0, which means nothing. So, moving on to the next columns. These columns indicate most of the information for the spell, surprisingly. A lot of information, I should say. These are the spell attributes column. Now, there's several of them. Obviously, there's 5 in total. Attributes, attributes, EX. Actually, I want to clear that sorting. Attributes EX through 4. And that's 5 total different flags that are used in these spells. Now, these numbers might seem like they're random, but they have very specific meaning, and I'm going to show you how to find out what that meaning is. And again, this is a flag. This is a decimal number that is actually a translated hexadecimal number. It's translated to decimal to be more readable in human format and to be more convenient to human use. But it's a hexadecimal enumeration of a flag. And that also can be found in spell defines. So we're going to take a look at the flags and exactly what they do and how they affect spells. So if we go into our spell defines header file and we scroll down, we can find these spell attributes definitions. You can do a Control F and to search spell attributes, you'll find this section. And the enumeration for all these spell attributes is listed here. Most have been recently updated to have proper names pulled directly from Blizzard. These are official Blizzard names, or at least I believe so. Some of them are unknown because we don't actually know what they are. This is part of the reverse engineering, is kind of figuring out what these flags do when they're present on a spell. But most of them are known, so you can see what their name is, and they'll have a brief description. You'll see these numbers in the middle. These are the hexadecimal flags that we are translating into decimal format to store within the template. So we can take a look through all of these attributes. They're divided into 5 different categories, obviously. So spell attributes, attributes X, attributes X2, X3, X4, and X4 is the last one, so 5 total. And then there is spell attributes custom. These are custom flags assigned directly within the spell template database. They don't exist client-side. They don't exist within the server DBC files. They're at the very last column, and they are custom flags that are used server-side to handle spells in a specific way. Let's say Mocking Blow requires you to be facing your target. So it has a custom flag of 128, which is what that translates to. It means that you need to be facing your target to use the spell, otherwise you'll get the client error message saying that your target is not in front of you. So we're going to go through the attributes of the Mocking Blow spell. 694, Mocking Blow rank 1. It has several attributes used, and we're going to find out exactly what they mean. So what we need to do is pull up a translator. I use rapid tables. We'll do hex to decimal translator. Just search Google hex to decimal, and the first result will be rapid tables converter. This website has many mathematic calculators that are very useful. It'll have binary converters, which are useful for creating spell and creature event scripts. The way that phases work is binary. Primarily, we're going to be using hex to decimal or decimal to hex. So when you have these two selected on this website, you can just swap between them very easily. But for now, we're going to need to translate from decimal to hexadecimal because the numbers here are decimal and they need to be converted to hex so that we can compare against the charts. So we're going to do the first one for Mocking Blow rank 1. If you see Mocking Blow, all 5 ranks all share the same flags. And this is typically true for most spells. There are a few exceptions where like a rank 5 spell might have some different effect, but very rarely. So we're going to take a look at the Mocking Blow rank 1 attributes column, and what we're going to do is we're going to click on that and Control-C to copy it. Make sure you're not editing the data. You can just manually punch that into rapid tables if you want, 327696, or you can copy it. And we're going to convert. Now, if you see the flags listed will actually line up for this. This is the hexadecimal number. It's 50,010. Now, if you're unfamiliar with hexadecimal, it's basically the best way to think about it is a compacted way of storing numbers, and it stores it off of powers of 2. And again, I'm no mathematician, so don't quote me on anything. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But basically, hexadecimal uses different base numbers than decimal. Decimal obviously is 10, hex is 6. So if you look at the flags here, you'll see that the way that hexadecimal works, instead of counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, it goes 1, 2, 4, 8, and then 10, 20, 40, 80, 100, 200, 400, 800. This is because hexadecimal stores values in bits, and bits are, in layman's terms, memory addresses use bits, and hexadecimal is a way of storing the numbers within those bits in the most compacted way, which is why we have to convert it, because this is how the server will read it. You don't need to have any of this memorized, but after working with it enough, you'll know exactly what they do. For example, mocking blow. Attribute 1 translates to hexadecimal 50,010, which means it has a flag for 10, a flag for 40,000, and a flag for 10,000. Now, this is going to be very, very confusing for you if you're not familiar with hexadecimal, so just try and follow along. You probably want to look up some guides, but working with it enough, you'll eventually kind of figure out how to translate all of this. So when you're working with hexadecimal, we start with the rightmost digit, which is 0, so obviously there's nothing in there. Next digit would be 1, and that would be hex flag of 10. So we can see this attribute is ability. That means mocking blow is an ability. And what that means is that the client puts ability instead of spell in the game strings for these spells. Spell abilities are treated differently than spells. For example, if you were to be silenced, you would still be able to use mocking blow because it's not a spell, it's an ability. Typically in World of Warcraft, abilities are like physical maneuvers, stuff like that. Whereas spells are magic. That's not always the case. Obviously there's exceptions. And there's a lot of creativity that can be taken with using different attributes in different combinations. A lot of the things on Wallcraft are conglomerations of many different attributes that typically wouldn't go together, but when they're put together, they create something new. So we'll keep on going through and see exactly what this spell has for attribute 1. So we know that it's flagged as an ability, and then we need to look at the next flag, which would be 50,000. Now, 50,000 isn't a hexadecimal number. You'll never find, an enumeration listed for 50,000. Instead, what you will find is 40,000 and 10,000, which is how it adds up to 50,000. Hexadecimal uses letters and numbers, and it can be very, very confusing at times, but once you figure it out, you'll have a good grasp of it. Now, for an example of it using letters and numbers, let's say as an example, just as an example, if this spell had the flags for needing exotic ammo, it was on next swing, no damage, and it had both of those flags, it would be 8 and 4. Now, 8 and 4 in hexadecimal don't combine to 12. It combines to letters. Essentially, once you move past 9, you begin using letters instead of additional numbers. And the reason for that is you're able to store more data within a single bit value, which would be moving up towards letters at that point. Let's just say, for example, you had like one single space on a paper that you could put one number into, and you needed to store the number 12. Well, obviously with decimal you can't because it requires 2 spaces. You would need a 1 and a 2 combined to make 12, which is 2 spaces. With hexadecimal, we can store a value of 12 represented as 8 plus 4, so it indicate these 2 flags are active, and if they were both active, the spell would instead have the letter C within that spot. So it would look like if this spell, instead of having as an ability, let's just say, we'll pretend it wasn't an ability, and typically it would be listed as 5010, but we're just going to say it's 50,000, whatever. Instead of, since you're not able to store like a 12 within this one spot, that obviously doesn't work, hexadecimal moves up from 8, goes from 8 to 9 to A to B to C, D, E, F. So 8 plus 4 is C in hexadecimal. It goes from 9, A, B, C. That's really the easiest way to think of it in practical terms, but using a calculator like this website, it'll save you a lot of trouble in inconvenience. I'm going to read through chat real quick while I just continue on with the lesson on hexadecimal. But we have for the mocking blow ability, obviously it was 327,696. Yeah, 50,010. 10 meaning it's an ability, and then 40,000 and 10,000 meaning it is an ability that does not cause your character to sheath their weapon, and it cannot be used while shapeshifted, as the 10,000 flag and the 40,000 flag. So if you are shapeshifted, if you're polymorphed or under the effects of some sort of shapeshift, you cannot use Mocking Blow. And when you use Mocking Blow, it will not sheath your weapon. Do not sheath means it won't hide your weapon on cast or use or on channel. The sheath thing in vanilla WoW is actually mostly just visual. But originally the intention was that if your weapon was sheathed, you couldn't attack with an ability and you couldn't block with a shield because your stuff is sheathed. Which is why some spells sheath your weapon, because it was meant to disable your ability to attack or defend yourself while using it. That idea was scrapped. I would love to re-implement it, and I've thought about it, so it's something that I'm going to consider in the future. So like, if you go to cast a healing spell as a shaman or a paladin, it sheaths your weapon and your shield. That means that up until you unsheath your weapon and your shield, you cannot use an ability or attack. Obviously, this would be made convenient by just being able to press the ability and it would automatically unsheath your weapon the same way that it does, but this, this right here was one of the original intentions. So you'll see a lot of spells that have the do not sheath flag. Right now, in vanilla, obviously, as it exists in vanilla, it's primarily just a visual thing. But, so that's the 3 flags in total that would be in the attribute 1 column for Mocking Blow. And what you do is you find out what flags you want. So since Mocking Blow is an ability, it is not castable in Shapeshift, and it does not sheath. That adds up to 50,010 in hexadecimal. So we would take those flags, and if we were creating a spell, we would take the flags that we want, which would be 50,010, and we would convert it. And then we would take that decimal number that we got and put it in the column. And then if I was, let's say, creating a new spell, obviously it works server side now because I have it on the server in the template, but that also needs to be within the client patch. And that means that the server DBCs should also have the same information matching the client patch as well as the template. So after I got done editing the spell, what I would do as a developer making a new spell, I would edit it within the spell template, and then I would go over to the spell DBC, and I would go to line 694 with Control G, and I would change the spell DBC that's used for the server, and then I would copy that spell DBC into the client patch. That way all 3 tables are matching up, and we don't have to worry about any discrepancies. And in order for the spell to work for the client, if I were to add a new spell to the server, the client wouldn't even be able to see it because the client doesn't know what it is. There's no data on it, and that's why we copy it from the DBCs into the client patch. That's how you make it work. But for now, we're just going to be browsing all of this information since it's just a mirror of itself. We're just going to be browsing it within Heidi for convenience because Heidi is a much better editing tool. WDBX is a very good DBC editor. It's actually a very good tool, but obviously it does lack some functionality. Spell template cannot easily be imported or exported without issues. There are some tables that can, but for most part I do all of this manually, so I will edit the spells. If I wanted to add a spell, I would copy one to add as a template, but let's say I wanted to change the attributes on this. I would change the attributes in my database with Heidi, and then I would go into WDBX and then do the same changes manually. And whereas with Heidi I can run SQL queries to do stuff like that, you can't do that for WDBX. You can with special importing functions that are set up. I don't particularly use them. The only ones that I really use are importing and exporting from CSV. But I don't have WDBX hooked up to my SQL server to import, because there's issues with it. It's not always going to work, and you don't want things breaking. especially with information like this. Regardless, though, we're going to move on to the next spell attributes column, and we're going to translate this one and translate the 3, which is the 3 different fields that are filled in here. So let's grab this number. We're going to take it over to our calculator, paste it in there, converting from decimal to hexadecimal. And we can see that in the spell attributes EX column is the flags 200 and 8 million. So we're going to find out what those mean by going to our reference sheet in our spell defines header file. And we're going to scroll down and... Okay, so it seems that Mocking Blow, when used, initiates combat, which means it starts your auto attack once it's used, which is flag 200. And then flag 8 million would be discount power on miss, meaning all these spells refund power on parry or deflect. So if my Mocking Blow is parried, or misses, or is deflected, it will not consume rage. It will just go on cooldown. And for a warrior ability to not consume rage on a miss, it would need this flag to be present, which is why it exists on Mocking Blow. So that one was simple, and we're going to go on to the last one, which is 1032. And we're going to run that through the calculator. And that is 408. That is in the spell attributes EX3 column. So we're going to go down to spell attributes EX3. And the number was 408. So we're going to take a look at the 8 flag, which is a blockable spell. Which means Mocking Blow, despite being a spell, is able to be blocked with a shield. And this doesn't exist on a whole lot of spells, but it does exist on many spells. It means that it's typically a melee ability or physical ability, something like Sinister Strike or whatnot, that is able to be blocked. And obviously most spells in vanilla aren't blockable, but these, with this flag, would be blockable. And then the last flag, 408, so 400, would be attribute EX3 main hand. And that means a main hand weapon is required in order to use this ability. If we didn't have a main hand weapon equipped and the spell has this flag, it will appear grayed out and it will say requires a weapon in the main hand if we attempted to use it without it. So that's how spells have their definitions, and you'll see all the different flags that will indicate the attributes of the spell. Some of them are very unique, so if you see that on a spell, you kind of know what it does. But combining all of these is pretty much how you define how a spell functions specifically. If a spell, let's say, for example, there's 2 spells that are generally the same. Let's say there's Pyroblast and Fireball. Those spells might function in a very similar manner or a very same manner. You know, they deal, you cast them, they have a cast time, they deal damage to a single target opponent, and it applies a damage over time effect. But let's just say, for example, Pyroblast couldn't be reflected. It would have a different flag indicating that is not reflectable, perhaps even not redirectable. Now, obviously, that's not the case in vanilla, that's just an example. But that's where the spells would differ in their definitions on how they're handled by the server core because of these attributes. And then we have the 5 attribute columns that define those. And we're going to move on to the next column, stances. Stances define what stance the spell can be used well in. Stances are, again, a numeration of hexadecimal that's translated to decimal and stored within the template. So we would take this number 65536 and run it through the calculator. That number translates to 10,000 in hexadecimal. So if we ran it through the calculator, it would be 65536 would be 10,000. Once you work with enough numbers, you start picking up on what they translate to. There's very basic ones. 65536 is a number you'll see repeated over and over. Anytime you see this number, it means 10,000 in hexadecimal. Now, again, it's not always the case that these numbers are translated from hexadecimal. Some columns, like the category, obviously this isn't a decimal conversion. This is just an integer, so it can be any number, really. But these numbers specifically have very strong meaning. If I were to change any of these numbers, it would change the entire spell. because this number is translated. So even, you know, if I changed it by 10,000, if I just took out this 1 right in the middle, it would change the spell, maybe even break it, because it doesn't translate to anything then, which is why we have to use the converter calculator. But stances, so Mocking Blow has a stance of 65536, which is 10,000. We can go to our stances, and we'll find stances by searching our project. And let me find it for you so we can just get you there quick. It's probably a new stance. If not, if we can't find it there, that means that it's probably stored within our DBC, which there is a stances, spell stances, DBC. So we're going to take a look at that. Or spell shapeshift form, I should say. So the stances are indicated within the shapeshift form. Stances are basically the shapeshift form. Can be thought of that in essence. So if we wanted to find out what the Mocking Blow's shapeshift form would be, within my client, you're going to see that it's the shapeshift mask is actually different. .694. So 65536 would be spell shapeshift form, and this would be indicated by the hexadecimal flags for the enumeration, and this would be berserker stance or battle stance, whatever is the one for Mocking Blow. And you can see that the ID columns are just integers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, etc. So this obviously, this list wouldn't be identified by the ID within the core. It would be identified by the flags, and those would align in the same manner. So this would be 1, 2, and then obviously since hexadecimal, it goes 4, 8, 10, 20, 40, 80, 100, 200, 400, 800, 1,000, 2,000, 4,000, 8,000, 10,000. So 10,000 would be battle stance, and there's enumerations within the core that we're going to pull up, but you can see that I just did that calculation in my head, and I was able to obtain the right information. 10,000 for the flag of shapeshift would be battle stance, which means this spell is only castable while in battle stance. Stances are treated like shapeshift, but they have special flags. This flag 7 on the stances indicates that the client treats it like a stance and not a shapeshift. You're able to use spells and whatnot. All these flags within the shapeshift form DBC, you'll see how they modify how you can actually interact with the world in these forms. If the flag indicates for, like for example, bear form 2264, this flag would mean that you can't ride a mount or a flight path or use items because of this flag being present. Creature type means that the bear is a creature type of 1, which is a beast. -1, the tree doesn't even have a type. It's a typeless form. These are different flags that are used on the shapeshift form, but we're just trying to find the information for what the entry is that's referenced within the spell template, which would be battle stance. So Mocking Blow is only castable in battle stance. In fact, what we're going to do to find it easily within the core, I'm going to do a global search, Control-Shift-F. I'm just going to search battle stance. Shapeshift form, aquatic. In fact, I'm going to search aquatic. See if there is enumerations. There actually isn't any enumerations within the core for the shapeshift stances. There might be, I just can't recall where they are right now. But we found that information from the shapeshift form DBC as it's referenced on the spell template. And you can see when you scroll over it, because the creators of this template decided to be very nice, they left comments for a lot of the stuff. You can't always rely on it, but it'll tell you where the information is referenced. So spell shapeshift form DBC, which is what we just looked at. And then stances not would be the opposite. If it has any stances, it means that spell is not castable within that stance. For example, if the spell didn't have a stance, let's just say this number was 0, but then it said 65536, it would mean that I could cast the spell in any stance except for battle stance. You can combine different stances and stances not to narrow down exactly how you want the spell to be casted and in what form you want it to be cast. A good example of this would be a lot of druid spells have stances not or stances because they have so many different forms as a druid. So for example, your balance spells, your caster spells, might have stances not, but stances would be 0, stances not would be filled with a flag. And that's because the balance spells are not castable in Shapeshift form, but they're castable in multiple different types of caster forms, be it a boomkin form, or basic druid caster form, or a tree form even. So you'll see that often in druid spells. These are used heavily. We're going to take a short break now that it's 5 o'clock. I plan on carrying out the lesson for, we'll go another hour and just keep going over the columns, kind of give you a general idea. And then I want people to start dabbling in this stuff over the next month, just kind of figure out how to make a new spell. This lesson obviously isn't going to cover how to make a new spell, but next lessons will. I would say next month's lesson will probably cover more of the core structure, and then we'll start working on some custom stuff. But for now, we're going to take a 5-minute break. We're going to carry this lesson on for another hour. And once we get back, we're going to go through a few more columns and just kind of keep progressing through the tables here for spell template. And don't forget, there's another 80 or so tables. So there's a lot of information held within the core. This is the bread and butter, though. This is the one that everybody always goes to first. It's the biggest one. Once you get spell template figured out, you should be able to figure out the other tables pretty easily. There is some archaic information that might not be very clearly referenced or where it's sourced from. Some things good luck finding a translation for the flags, but that's the joy of reverse engineering something like this, is that you get to figure it out yourself. So, we're going to be here in 5 minutes. Everybody go online. fellas, we're back. Get everybody a second to get acclimated. And let me read through the chat. Oh, let's see. Rodan asked a question on YouTube Live half an hour ago. I'm sorry, I'm actually not watching the YouTube Live chat right now. Let me take a look, though, I think, on OBS. There we go. Rodan says he tried to edit Gar's add Firesworn spell, Massive Eruption 20483. When I reduced base points 1 at set and die side 1, it did not work. If assuming that that's the right spell ID, you would need to change base points 1. The die side affects the rolls, so let's say the spell can hit between 1,000 and 2,000. The die side roll would be like 1,000, and that would be the variance, and then the base points would be like, or the die side would be 500, the base points would be like 1,500, and that allows for a variance between 1,000 and 2,000. So you would primarily just edit the base points, just reduce the overall value for a spell like that. Let's say the spell hits for 2,000, for example, and you wanted it to hit for 1,000. The base points would say like 1999. And that's because base points always have 1 added to it by the core if there's any die sides present. But so you just change that from 2,000 down to 1,000, and then you need to do the same for your client and for the DBC. But because that's a spell damage value, it's actually calculated by the server core, so you don't particularly need it client side, because the client will never actually see the spell in its spell book. It'll never see the tooltip of the spell itself. The damage that's in combat log is calculated and reported by the server to the client, and that's not really impacted by the information within the client. So if you just wanted to reduce the number, the damage done by that spell, you would just reduce the base points within your spell template database in Heidi. Somebody in YouTube chat, Mr. Nobody asks, will you add Grimbatol, Uldum, and Gilneas? Yes, I do plan on adding all of them. Grimbatol will be a world boss outside open world encounter with raid eventually added to the inside. Uldum, same kind of deal. I probably will have a world boss outside there that once he's dead you'll be able to access Uldum. Gilneas, if I ever do add Gilneas, I can't guarantee Gilneas because if I ever do add Gilneas, I would just very likely backport the city, but if I wanted to go really crazy, I would start doing WMO edits and M2 edits in Blender, and WMO particularly, and just make my own Gilneas using assets that are similar to the Gilnean buildings. That's a lot of map work, though, for what would essentially just be a town. And if I ever did that, then people would want to play as Worgen and whatnot, and not really trying to add any custom races until I do a custom client. Eventually, the first races that I add that will be custom will be Ogre and Goblin, very likely, because those were the and Naga. Those are the original alpha intended classes or races. And let's see. Alright, that's all the YouTube chat. Take a look at Discord real quick. Alright. Zug says, Hex just uses 16 char per ordinal position, 0 through F. It's just a way of showing a binary value, same as decimal shows 10 digits, 0 through 9. Yeah, precisely. Very good definition. Thank you for posting that. Hexadecimal is just essentially a way of compacting numbers down to store more information in a single bit value. And that's why it uses letters additionally. Let me find my lighter real quick. I keep losing my lighter. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just going to grab another one. Alright. 3 Chimes asks, who taught you all of this for the WoW structures? I mean, I asked a lot of questions, so there's definitely a lot of people who helped me along the way, but it's mostly just, you know, perseverance and eventually figure it out. And that's how, honestly, most developers have gotten to the same point. You know, you just figure it out yourself, or you have a background in it. For me, I'm not a computer programmer. I just started dabbling in VMaNGOS. I did programming when I was a kid, when I was in high school. I did a 2-year certification course for computer programming. That was when I was 16, though. That was ages ago. So. Zug says, I think you can use an option in Visual Studio, right-click the enum value and add it to watch list, and you can view it in decimal. That would actually be helpful. I've never heard of that. Quick action. Yeah, I'd have to tinker around with that. I've never used that option. Keep reading through the chat here. Kazgrim has a question. Is it possible to tie spells not learned via talent trees to an actual talent tree, where, say, a player learns a spell via a book, and if he resets his talent points, it becomes unlearned? You would need to edit the core for that. Talent points and their assignments and resetting is handled in the core. You would have to add a function that would check to see whether or not the spell is part of the talent tree. So it would look up the stored value, because there's a cache that's used for that. So it would look up the stored value, and if it doesn't match, but it's known, then you could have it function like a talent without actually being a talent. But that would require a new function. Let's see. Flag makes me think there's a problem. Flag is just prerequisite. How do you find the page spell defines H in Microsoft Visual Studio? Do I search something? Farrah, did you find it? Sorry, I only have one screen right now, so I'm not reading chat if I'm looking at other shit. To find spell defines H in Visual Studio, you just open up your solution like I showed you, and then search spell defines. Double click it, and it'll pull it up. Let's see. Plax asks, Wall, could you please tell, is it hard to debug server, to set up debugs? No, it's not. If you're familiar with debugging, I'm not very familiar with debugging, like, overall, but in terms of debugging VMaNGOS, yeah, it's pretty easy to do. Namreeb was the guy who knew how to really work with debuggers. He's a computer scientist, though, 20-year career computer scientist, so he knows how to handle stepping over and stepping out of things and stuff like that. But in terms of debugging, it's pretty simple. You just build your solution with, you should build it with TBB debug enabled, and then when you go to compile, you just change the option to either debug, or if you've compiled with TBB debugs, you just do release with debug info. I would personally use release with debug info because debug option, your server is going to run nightmarishly slow with all the full debugger running. Release with debug info will just build the release, but with debug symbols enabled. And with your TBB debugger, then if you ever have a crash, you can just open up the solution in Visual Studio in real time while the console's still active and see exactly where it crashed. It will tell you because they don't have the symbol definitions loaded. So debugging isn't too difficult. I mean, I explained it several times though, so just try and follow along as best you can. If you can't find something, then try and ping me so I can hear it, but I don't have both pages pulled up, so I'm not reading chat while I'm explaining stuff. Farah, you posted the picture though of that's the correct place. You're opening up the same file, but it's much easier to just open up the solution file as it contains everything. So you go into your server, you go build, double click the solution file, pulls up the solution, then you just search right in here, just search spell defines. This is like a basically like a file browser. So that's a lot more convenient because then you can search the full solution. Let's say there's a different file that contains the information we need, you won't be able to find it just pulling up that single file. So I want to load the solution. Actually, I need to reload my solution because I'm just trying to open two. That's fine. Yeah, 1 second. Yeah, click on VMaNGOS. So at the top in that screenshot you posted, you know, your J drive, VMaNGOS, build, and then double click the mangos.sln file. That's your solution file. Your solution file is basically like a conglomeration of all the stuff, and then that's what gets compiled. So with the solution file, you'll have everything open basically. Whereas if you just click on spell defines, it only pulls up the header file, which is how I was browsing it earlier, which is Notepad++, just opening that. But much better to just open the solution. And then you just search spell defines right in the solution. Let's see. In the server. Yeah, in your server. J drive, VMaNGOS folder. Okay, VMaNGOS, build, Mango solution. It might just be called Mangos. Post a screenshot of your build folder, and I'll tell you what file to click. Yeah, just click that one. That's the solution file. Okay, moving back to the database, we're just going to keep going through the columns. And we left off on targets. Targets is another hexadecimal enumeration that's translated to decimal, and it indicates different target flags, basically. We're not going to delve too deep into this. I can't actually remember where it's even referenced. But basically, if you see 256, it means it's an AoE spell. That's really all you need to know. Or it's a spell that's castable on... It's a spell that's castable on a different target than what the character has selected. 256 is used for trainer spells because the trainers don't actually target you. They cast a spell based on a dialogue that you're having with the cast UI. So that's just a flag. You'll very rarely ever need to use this. Moving on with columns, target creature type. If a spell can only specifically target a creature type, like Exorcism can only target undead creatures, for example. It would have the target creature type flag, and that is listed within creature type DBC. So if you were to pull up creature type, load it, classic, and double click it, and you can see all the listings for the creature types. This value is stored as integer on the table, I believe. So let's see, creature type. Yeah, so that's integer, and it just references creature type DBC. So if it had 1, it would be beast. If it had 9, it would be mechanical. You would see it within the spell. Requires spell focus. This would indicate an item ID, and this would be, or an object ID, I should say. This would be for a spell that requires some sort of game object to be nearby in order to cast it. An example of this would be like some of the like the Shaman Quest spells, like the Sapta or whatever. When you do the Shaman Quest, there's like that pillar near the quest area. That's actually a game object that is a spell focused required for some of the quest stuff, and you have to be within a certain range in order to use it. Warlock's Ritual of Summoning spell summons a game object. I think it's used as a spell focused. This is essentially for game objects in the world that need to be used in order to use a spell. So very rarely will you probably ever use this, but there's obviously many cases where you would need to use it, so just heads up on what that is. Caster Aura State and Target Aura State are the next two columns, and these are columns that we should talk about in a little bit more depth. Let me just read through the chat real quick. Farah, click on Search Solution Explorer. And at the top, just click that box and then just type in spell defines. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, 3 chimes is right. So you can make spells that can only be cast by fire, similar to cooking skill. Exactly. I think all cooking spells actually have required spell focus of a fire. Same with most crafting spells. For like blacksmithing, it would be an anvil that would require a spell focus. I can't remember if this is actually just binary value or what actually uses this. I can't remember any spells off the top of my head. If I were to look up Dirge's... Yeah, Dirge's Kicking Chimeric Chops requires a spell focus of 4. A 4 would likely be listed as a campfire or fire. And Heavy Mithril, just gonna look that up. Yeah, Heavy Mithril requires a spell focus of 1. So it's an integer value that's a listed enumeration for what spell focus. Okay, yeah, so ID, name language string, that's for the spell focus object entry. Okay, so that would actually be a DBC thing then. So we would go in the DBC and spell focus object. There we go. We'll pull up that DBC file, and yep, we can see 1 is an anvil, so heavy thorium plate, whatever, requires an anvil. Cooking fire is listed as 4. There's all the different objects that are used as a spell focus are listed within this table. And in fact, you can see on Wallcraft there's a brand new one, 2000 for Sacred Site. That's used in the ZG Attunement quest, so that you can activate the gem to summon Iranicus. It has a game object at the location, and if you're not close enough to the game object, the spell won't work. So that's how the spell focus is used there. And you can see that there's a lot that are mostly for locations, for quests and stuff. Like Airy Peak. What is this? Yeah, Airy Peak Town Center. So like there's a spell that requires you to be in the town center of Airy Peak. There's an invisible game object called that at that spot, and if you're within that certain distance, you'll be able to use that spell that has that as the focus ID. But back to Mocking Blow, our example. and we're going to take a look at aura states. Now, aura states are a very, very powerful tool. In Wallcraft, I have like 40 extra aura states added. In default vanilla, there's like 20 different aura states. Aura states indicate what state the player is currently in for whatever, really whatever you want to define it as. The weather systems themselves use aura states, where the way that the storm cloud that KOs you, the way that that works is it summons a creature above the player's head once they fall below 20% health and they gain the aura state of being less than 20% health. It'll summon a creature, and then the creature will cast a spell that requires the target to be below 20% health, that lightning bolt. So that 20% health state is indicated as an aura state. We're talking in the Heidi SQL. We're just going over the columns right now. Don't worry about the file extensions thing. You don't need to worry about that. What he's talking about is showing file extensions in Windows. You would need to change that. You don't really need to worry about that though. For now, we're just looking at the database. We're in the spell template table of the database. We're looking at Mocking Blow, so we just search Mocking Blow. And we're focusing on entry 694, which is Mocking Blow rank 1 for our example. Mocking Blow obviously doesn't require any target aura states in default vanilla. In Wallcraft, this spell would have a target aura state of 23, I believe. Let's see, Mocking. Let's see. State. And we can see in the spell defines section. So we go to spell defines if we want to see what the aura states are. These are the default vanilla aura states. We can see that one isn't implemented and one isn't used in vanilla. Neither is the frozen one, so only some of these aura states are actually used. The custom aura states not based on data. There is the health less 5, 10, and 15. These are all used for NPC states when they flee at low health. They're not actually used within spells for these three. They are for a few Wallcraft spells, but not in default vanilla. Those are used for the server to put the creature in an aura state to flee when they're low health. So you can see though, for an example, Execute would have a target aura state of 2 listed. It would be right here, a target aura state for the spell Execute, for Warrior's Execute. The target would have to be health less than 20%. So if the target isn't 20% or less health, because it has that flag in the Execute spell, for that, the spell won't even appear active. Because of other flags that we have set, you won't be able to use that spell. You can see some of the new aura states that are listed in Wallcraft. And Wallcraft aura states right here, like Righteous, aura state Righteous. This is used in the Armor of the Righteous Paladin talent, and the talent on Wallcraft says whenever you are affected by the Devotion aura, you have damage reduction as a Paladin. And the reason that the spell is set up like that, instead of using the traditional, changing your own Devotion spell, is so that if a Paladin is affected by Devotion aura from somebody else and not himself, he still gains the benefit, provided that he has the talents. So the talent itself would be a spell that is learned through the talent tree. It's a passive spell. It's flagged to not show up in your spell book using the spell attributes. And it doesn't show in your combat log, so you can't tell that you have it learned outside of the talent tree, because it's a passive spell. And that spell will stay inactive because the caster aura state requires them to have an aura state Righteous in order for it to be active. Since passive abilities, if they have aura states that aren't active on the caster or on the target, they won't be present, they won't be active. For Armor of the Righteous, I would need to have that aura state applied. Now, the way that aura states are handled is within the core, and they can be handled really anywhere. Let's say my character dies. These aura states would get cleaned up after a character dies and their death state is set. And the reason that we clean this up is because obviously if you die, you don't have this aura state anymore, you're dead. Some aura states might persist through death, but not any that I have in my core or any that I can think of. There would be a few, though, if you wanted to add something custom like that. But, so aura state devoted would get cleaned up on death. The way that it's added is within the spell auras C++ file. And this file is where the spell auras are handled. We don't need to browse for this. We're just going to look at this as an example on my screen, though. In that Wallcraft Armor of the Righteous triggers, if the aura for spell auras is present for devotion aura, and the way that we search for that is if get spell proto is fit to family mask paladin devotion aura. So if the aura that's being handled by this is fit to the paladin devotion aura flag, then the target will have their aura state modified to devoted. And when the aura is removed from remove spell aura holder, and we don't have that aura anymore, it will trigger the removal of the aura state. And then that aura state, as indicated by the template, would control whether or not the spell works. So aura states are very powerful. Probably one of the more powerful things that you can have for a spell, because you can very specifically determine how a spell should be handled, if it's castable or not, or if it's active or not when it's a passive. Aura states can be expanded infinitely. They can cause, let's say you had 500 new aura states that were constantly running checks on every update cycle for every player, that would eventually start lagging down your server. So you do have to implement them properly in a way that's not going to cause any issues like that. But so far I haven't seen anything like that, because I try and handle auras at real application instead of just supposed. Oh, thank you for posting that, Thims. I am so unfamiliar with Windows 10. I didn't even know how to change that. So we're going to go on to the next column, casting time. The casting time column indicates how long the spell takes to cast. If it's got a casting time of 1, it means it's instant. Because Mocking Blow is an instant ability, there is no casting time, so it's casting time of 1. This is hexadecimal enumerations that are translated. Spell casting times are referenced within the spell casting times, or spell cast times DBC. So if we wanted to find out what all of these numbers meant, we would pull up the spell cast times DBC and load it for classic. Select the table, and we can see for Mocking Blow it has no time, no cast time, and no time per level. Other examples of like a spell that you might see, if a spell like a teleport spell has a 10-second cast time, the cast time would be listed as 7. And that would be because it has a base 10-second cast time with a minimum 10-second cast time. The base and the minimum typically will match, and time per level can be used, but it's typically not. And that's for spells that get faster with levels, for player levels, or with spell levels. I'm not sure how the core handles that specifically, if it's player level or spell level, but so those are just 3 columns that are referenced for casting time. The casting time of 1 obviously means it's instant, because it's an instant ability. Moving on to the next column, though, recovery time. Recovery time is how long does the spell go on cooldown when it's used. And you're going to have actually 3 different fields that indicate and deal with recovery time. Recovery time in this column indicates whether or not the spell is exclusively setting itself on cooldown. Category recovery time sets all of the spells within that category on cooldown. So remember, we had a category of 40. It means if we use this spell, all spells that have a category of 40, whether or not they're spells that we even know as a warrior. Just every spell that has a category of 40 for our character would go on cooldown. That's why in vanilla you'll see sometimes some wonky shit with like older vanilla patches and patch progression servers. Is like, oh, I used a spell and my engineering items went on cooldown. What gives? Well, it's because the older patch or the older clients, or for really whatever reason, the item spell and whatever spell you use that put it on cooldown share the same category. And because it has a category cooldown on that spell, it'll put everything on that category on cooldown. Which is why item spells, they changed later on throughout the life cycle of vanilla to not use the same categories as other stuff. But in early patches or early client versions, you would see like engineering items would put trinkets on cooldown. 6 Demon Bag goes on like a half an hour cooldown if you use an engineering item or something like that. And it's really kind of dopey, but they fixed it later on. So that's why there's 2 different columns. And then again, there's another one that indicates category recovery time for starts. Moving on though, interrupt flags, aura interrupt flags, channel interrupt flags. These are the 3 flags that are used to indicate how the spell interrupt is handled. I'm going to read over chat real quick, but we're going to take a look in, of course, spell defines header file. And I'm just going to search interrupt. And you'll see all of the listings. Okay, spell interrupt flags. If you search that, you'll find it within your spell defines file. Spell interrupt, spell aura interrupt, and spell channel interrupt are the 3, but only spell and aura are listed here in the enumerations. That's because channeled uses the same flags as spell interrupt. So channeled and spell, basically interrupt flags and channel interrupt flags use the same flags. Aura interrupt has its own categories, obviously. Spell interrupt is how does the spell interrupt get handled. Some spells, they don't take damage, or some spells don't suffer pushback when you're damaged. Some spells will continue casting while you're moving. Some spells will stop casting if you're moving or stunned or put in combat. Some spells, even being damaged, will cancel the spell. That's all handled with these flags here. And again, these are translated from hexadecimal, so if we wanted the spell to be interrupted upon entering combat and to cancel when we take damage, we would need a hex flag of 18, which would translate to 24 in decimal. As you can see on this spell, it doesn't have any interrupt flags, and that's because it's an instant melee ability, and there's no cast time to it, there's no aura applied to the user, and the aura that's applied to the victim cannot be removed through any type of interrupt. Now, obviously, like invulnerability and purges, those types of dispels are a different thing, but these are interrupts as to when the server should remove the spell automatically. Moving on to the next column, real quick, I just want to check over chat. GG's 3 chimes, thank you for tuning in. We're going to continue this lesson for like another 20 minutes. Then, obviously, the next lesson is going to be same day, last Sunday of last Saturday of March. But we're going to try and squeeze as much as we can in the next 20 minutes here. Farah, don't worry about getting that page. You don't need to worry about that. Yeah, I'll let you know if you need to go to any pages, but a lot of this stuff you just follow along. You don't need to click on anything. 3 chimes says Snowfall is an add-on to allow casting on button down, not on button release. Is that server side or hardware? That's client side. Snowfall, I don't know how it's handled, but basically in the vanilla client, there's spells don't activate until you release the key instead of pressing it down. Snowfall just changes how the client handles that. It'll send the spell request from the client on key press instead of key up. Farah asks, so channel interrupt flags could be set to only be interrupted by silence rather than interrupt if I wanted, right? Correct. For some things, you would need to use special flags. There's actually, if you want an example of like a channel spell that can be cast while moving, you can look at the Hakar spell that he uses. His Blood Siphon's castable while moving. If the spell channel didn't have these interrupt flags, if it's a channeled spell, it would need to be specially defined within the core because channeled spells would still be interrupted. But as an example, the Mage's Scorch on Wallcraft and Warlock's Searing Pain is castable while moving. That's because I removed the spell interrupt flag movement for those casts, so you can still cast them while moving. It won't be interrupted. Fair asks, how do you navigate in WDBX? It's the same thing, basically. Open up what you need. Like right now we're in the spell DBC, and it's almost a carbon copy of spell template. And then you just scroll around and left and right. And it's just filter. You can create filters. You can go up in the top right and create filters by selecting the columns that you want to show. Typically, you'd want to show all the columns, though. There's no way to just filter out in WDBX. As I said, it's not as powerful as Heidi. It's just a basic program for viewing DBCs. It's a good program, but it's just basic. So typically, for WDBX, if you're doing any work, just go directly to the line that you want to work. Control-G will pull up the ID selection. And since we're working with ID 694 for Mocking Blow Rank 1, we're going to go to 694. And now that we're here, there we are. Yeah, there's no way to like just filter. Like if I wanted to just pull up all the Mocking Blow spells, then you're not going to be able to do that in WDBX. How do you know the ID? Search the spell in Heidi using the multi-column filter. Find the spell that you want. For example, we scroll all the way to the right, we can see the name column. Mocking Blow Rank 1, that's what we're working with, and it's the newest build one. So this is the one that we want. ID 694 for entry. That's what we would search in WDBX because that's, again, the entry. 694 is the ID and entry interchangeable, basically. Oh, it's going to take forever. It's still going. Another 20 gigabytes to transfer. ID for Mocking Blow is 694 for rank 1. And that's the spell that we've been working with for this lesson. Entry 694. Moving on, though, to the next column. Next column that we're going to be looking at is proc flags. This is a fun one. This is how you determine whether, or how a spell or whether or not it procs. If the spell has a proc, it probably has a proc flag. If you don't see a proc flag listed in here, it's because there's a separate table that it also handles proc flags. This is a server-only table. It's spell proc event. If you go into spell proc event table, you'll see that some spells have entries listed here. This isn't all-inclusive, and there's only maybe a couple hundred in total. How many? 200 rows total. So there's 200 entries in spell proc event that are handled in a special way. And that's actually most player proc spells because they're very specific in how they should be handled. But the proc flags column is essentially the same thing that you'll find in that table. Proc flags are indicated within spell defines. So we're on the proc flags column. We're going to search proc flags. And if we look in spell defines, we'll see all of the listings for the proc flags and how they should handle. So if a spell was supposed to proc on melee swing or taking melee damage, etc., it would be indicated by these flags. A good example of this would be like Mage's Clear Casting. We'll just say Mage's Clear Casting talent. That spell activates when you deal damage with a harmful spell. So that spell would have a flag of 10,000 hexadecimal, which is 65536, translated to decimal. There's a few custom flags. They're slowly being phased out in favor of just handling it correctly in the core instead of using custom flags for these cases. But I still do use them myself, so likely I won't be removing them from Wallcraft, just VMaNGOS will. But these are the proc flags. So you'll see some spells will have proc flags indicated. In fact, we'll take a look at what's a good one? Storm Strike. Yeah, Storm Strike is a good one. So Storm Strike, the Shaman spell, has a proc flag of 139944. So we're going to go translate that. 139944. That is 22288 in hexadecimal. Now this is one of those wacky hexadecimal numbers that doesn't translate very easily. So kind of just have to understand how it's working, because it's 22288. It means the first digit we look at is the 8. And proc flag 8 means it will proc when you take a melee swing. A would be in the tens row, and that is A is 8 plus 2. So that means it will proc on taking ranged attack or taking melee ability. Now this is the Storm Strike debuff that increases nature damage taken, not the physical spell that we're referencing here. So the Storm Strike debuff, when you take nature damage, it will proc. Well, how does it proc? It's not just when you take damage from everything, it's from nature. And it must be a melee ability, a spell, a range attack. In fact, we see 222, so 20,000, 2,000, and 200. So yeah, take ranged ability, take harmful ability, or take harmful spell. So basically, anytime we take damage from a melee ability, a ranged ability, a spell, anything like that, it can proc. So those are the flags defined for Storm Strike. And then if we look at the spell ID, 17364, and we go to spell proc event, because this is, obviously, it's handled with nature damage, which means this proc will trigger only specifically from nature damage. That information is stored in spell proc event table, if it's specific like that. So what was the number? 17364. Okay, so Storm Strike has an entry listed in spell proc event. 17364 is Storm Strike spell ID. The school mask is listed as 8. 8 would be nature school, and it has no additional custom proc information. This table exists just to indicate that it only procs from nature damage. That's why this entry is here. So again, you'll have references from other tables that are used simultaneously in conjunction, and it will take a long time to really become fully familiarized with how they all interact with each other. And there's a lot of times where I'll be editing a spell and I can't figure out why it's not working, and then I look in the spell effect table and I see, oh, okay, well, it has an entry here that's overriding it, and I didn't even know that it existed, and I'm trying to change the spell template, but it's being handled by spell effect table instead. So it's like, it can be a little frustrating, but once you have a general idea of how everything interacts with each other, then you'll have a lot more confidence on knowing, how to change things. So the proc flags are set here, and they also, again, are set in spell proc event. Even if this flag is 0, it might still have an entry in spell proc event, which is going to override it anyways, so it doesn't even really matter. If we have a spell proc event entry, then we actually don't even need to worry about these. The spell proc chance, obviously, is the percentage chance. It's listed as 101 by default. Anything over 100 will not proc, so it's just kind of like a default number. Because you can't have a negative in here. It's the way that the integer is for the column. Spell proc charges. A good example is like Lightning Shield. It only has 3 charges. So it will have 3 different charges that can proc from it. It would have a 3 in the proc charges value. Proc charges field. The A, again, is hexadecimal. It doesn't go 1 to 10. It goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm sorry. Hexadecimal doesn't use base 10. It uses powers of 2, essentially, for their bit values. So a value of A would be 8 plus 2. It doesn't equal 10. It goes 8, 9, A, B, C, D, E, F. And then it would move, those would be the first 15, 0 through 15, and then obviously 16 is going to be a different hex value entirely. 16 would be actually 10. Yeah, so 8 plus 2. So if it has an A in that row, look for that example, the hex was 222 A8. So in the tens column, the tens digit place, it would have 8 and 2. So 80 and 20 for the flag. So if we go, what were we even translating there? Oh, proc flags. So if it had that proc flag, it would have 80 and 20. It would proc from taking a melee ability or taking a ranged attack. That's what the A indicates. Moving back to the spell template, we've got about another 5 minutes, and then we're going to wrap it up. So I'm just going to fly through some of the stuff. It's very basic. Spell max level. This indicates the max level at which point the spell stops scaling from player level. Some spells like Mage's Fireball, rank 5 Fireball, will have a max level higher than the base level because the damage actually continues going up as you gain player levels up until a certain point, and then you're obviously expected to learn the next rank of the spell. That helps keep spells having a little bit more value. That's just how the Blizzard design was for the spell. The base level of the spell and the spell level indicate what the spell's level is and what the base level to learn the spell is. So base level is the level requirement for the player, and then the spell level is kind of like item level, but for spells. It indicates how powerful the spell is in terms of level. Duration index is an index reference. It's, again, a decimal number that's translated, or it's a hexadecimal number that's translated to decimal, and it indicates an index value that's enumerated within the spell duration DBC. So if we open WDBX, we open the spell duration DBC, we'd be able to see what value that is. So it has a duration index of 32, and that again is decimal translated. So 32 and hexadecimal, obviously that's going to be 20. So we would look at the spell duration table. We would look at entry 20. And this would be 60,000 with a max duration of 80,000. Duration scales down per level. Or, I'm sorry, actually, is that even? No, I'm dumb, actually. That's spell duration index isn't even translated. That's directly referencing the index value. So it would just be 32. I was going to say that's not right. So spell duration is just a direct index reference, so it would be 32. And that means Mocking Blow, the debuff, has a duration of 6 seconds. That's correct. So spell duration references the spell duration DBC index value. It's not a translation or conversion of a hex value. It's just an index value. Power type, Mocking Blow, obviously it costs rage. Power types are indicated by different values, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 is rage, 2 is energy, 3 is focus, which is used by hunter pets, and 4, I believe, is mana, something like that. But you'll find that within spell defines, I believe. Search power rage. Power focus. Shared. Okay, so power types are actually listed in a different header file called shared defines. This is kind of a global header file that's used by a lot of different things within the core. And you'll see mana, rage, focus, energy, happiness, and health. These are all different power values assigned. Health obviously has a weird hex flag for its value. It's because it's actually -2. But you'll never really need to use that one anyways, so don't worry too much. So this spell is a type 1. It uses power rage for Mocking Blow, obviously. And the mana cost, you'll see it's listed in raw mana value. This is not a percentile, but rage is actually multiplied by 10 within these values because rage is divided by 10 by the client. So 100 rage would actually just be 10 rage cost for a rage-based spell. Mana cost per level, if the spell costs more per level, it would be indicated here. Let's just say, for example, if Mocking Blow costs 1 extra rage per player level, it would have a 1 in this column. Obviously it doesn't though. Mana per second is how much channeled spell will drain your mana per second. Some spells have different values for that. Mana per second per level, same concept, scales up per level. Range index is an indexed entry within the spell range DBC. And again, that's not a translation, that's just an index value. So we would pull up the spell range DBC to find out what that is. And entry 2 would be combat range 5 yards max, 0 yards minimum, with a flag of 1, which means you need to... The flag, largely irrelevant aside from combat range, but I believe it means facing target or something. I can't recall off the top of my head. But so Mocking Blow has a range of 5 yards max, 0 yards minimum. It's a combat spell, as indicated by the notes under the name there. Spell speed, it's an instant cast, it doesn't have a projectile. Spell speed is used to indicate the speed at which the spell travels when it has a projectile. The projectile is strictly visual, but obviously the server needs to match the same speed as the projectile. So like a fireball, if we look at a pyroblast, in fact, you'll see the speed will be 24. That's an index value as well, I believe. I can't remember where that's exactly referenced, but not too worried about it. You basically just copy a different spell to find the right speed. Model next spell is a spell visual thing. You'll never really have to worry about this column. It's for when a spell transforms visually, and it has to be indicated within the core because the spell itself is changing. But that's very rarely used outside a few special circumstances, so don't worry too much about that. Stack amount, how much can a spell stack to? An example is the Freezing Death on Wallcraft stacks to 100, so it would have 100 in the stack amount. Any spell that has ability to stack is indicated here with how much it can stack. If it's 0, it means the spell doesn't stack. It can only have one application at a time. Alright, Pharaoh, just follow along though. I see you posting a lot of stuff here. But, again, you don't need to worry about the WDBX stuff. Just follow along in the template. Next topic. So this one is the 20 and is the 80. Correct. Yes, that's correct. According to the pictures there. And filters your search. Yeah, but you can't really filter in WDBX. There isn't really a filter. Like, WDBX doesn't really have... You have column filters, that's about it. So if I would search all the columns here, and get rid of, like, display names for other DBCs and shit. This button will hide empty rows, so... Since those DBC values aren't listed here, obviously those rows are empty, but WDBX doesn't really have powerful filtering options, unfortunately. You just kind of have to do it by hand. Let's say, as an example, if I wanted to change Mocking Blow to function differently, I would need to change all 5 ranks of the spell to be the same, but, you know, with their different scalings. I would edit all of these, and then I would go through one by one for each of these entries in WDBX, because they're not... numerically listed in order. You know, it's 694 and then 7400, so obviously there's several thousand spells in between them. I would just go to my spell template, I would do 694 first, I would edit that spell, and then I would just go right back to the next one and do it the same way. I would edit the next, and then sometimes they're close, sometimes they're in order. Like for these two, I would edit both of these at the same time because they're just 2 rows apart, and then same for the next one, 20,559 and then 20,560. They're next to each other, so they're a lot easier to edit. And sometimes you'll get lucky. Sometimes spells, like 5 different ranks of a spell or whatever, 5 different talents. A lot of times talents especially, they'll all be in the same order next to each other, and then you can just edit them all at the same time. A good example would, let's see, I can search for something. Armor of the Righteous. I'll search for a Wallcraft spell so I know it's not jumping around. So yeah, like Armor of the Righteous talent. Since it's a talent and it was all created at the same time, all 5 of the talent spells that are used are all in the same order. So those are easy to edit because I can just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for all the columns. That's the easiest way to edit your DBCs. Regardless of that, though, I think we're going to just about wrap it up. We're going to obviously want to get through the rest of the columns, but if you read through them, you're going to kind of figure out what they mean. I'll give a brief breakdown of some of them. Totem requires a special item. Regent, same thing, requires special items to cast it. The count is indicated within the next rows or columns. Equipped item class and equipped item submask indicate what weapon or armor or item needs to be equipped and what type of armor, item, or whatever needs to be equipped. 2 would mean a weapon. For Mocking Blow, you need a main hand weapon. And the item subclass masks would be totaling of all of the different weapon types that can be used with Mocking Blow. This number is pretty big. It's because you can use Mocking Blow with basically any melee weapon, so each type, each subclass of weapon would need to be indicated here. An example for a skill that requires specific spells would be like Thrown. It would require an equipped weapon of throwing weapons specifically, so it would have just the throwing weapon flag. And then equipped item inventory type mask. That's for inventory types, not really specifically used in many things. Very niche there. Either way, though, we're wrapping it up right here at the Effect 1 column, because this is really where the bread and butter of it all comes in. This is where the spell information for the actual spell itself is hosted. All the other stuff is just kind of like details and descriptions for the spell on how it should handle. This and after it are the spell effects themselves. So, for example, Mocking Blow, Effect 1, Effect 2. I can tell you off the top of my head, Effect 2 is deal weapon damage, or just deal damage. And Effect 6 is apply aura. So Mocking Blow would deal damage and apply an aura. And the way that those are indicated are basically all the rest of the columns in the DBC. So like aura, apply aura name 2. For Mocking Blow second effect, it would apply an aura indicated by aura 11, and then we'd be able to find that within spell aura defines. Spell aura 11 is a taunt, so it would deal damage and apply a taunt. We'll go through all the information for the other columns next month, but for now, what I'd like you to do is do a little bit of research on your own, find out different spells in the DBC, come to me with a spell that you want to edit, and before you even edit, just let me know, and that way I can do a little bit of research on the spell itself, just to make sure, find out, what you're trying to accomplish and help walk you through it. So, I want everybody to find a spell that they want to make, or think up one original spell, and we'll go from there. But for now, I would say just find a spell that you want to change and edit, and we'll work on doing that, because creating a new one from scratch is a lot more complex. You're going to need all the right information, and typically most spells are easiest just copied and then modified from other spells that exist with similar function. For example, if I wanted to add a fireball-like spell, I wouldn't make it from scratch. I would just copy fireball and then change whatever I need to change as kind of like a template. But that's about all that we're going to do for today. I know some people were excited for another 12 hours, but we're going to try and keep the lessons compacted to, like 3 hours generally, maybe a little bit more. Today we did 4, so thank you for tuning in. Thank you everybody who's listening on YouTube, anybody who's in the comments. Feel free to join the Discord. If you're interested in joining the classroom sessions, you can find out more information at my website, wallcraft.org. Subscribing to the Patreon at any tier allows you to access the classroom sessions and join in for one-on-one stream time here. That way we can get more people involved in the private server development scene. If you like Wallcraft, of course, don't forget to, again, join the Discord, subscribe and like the YouTube video. Make sure you follow the content. I try and post every other day or so. This past week's been very busy for me building all this new hardware and stuff, so still in the process of getting that all set up, and want to make sure everything is all handled correctly. But yeah, very excited to continue doing these classrooms. Don't forget, tomorrow is the tournament. It's going to be a competition, a team-based competition to clear BRD, as many bosses as possible, in an open world raid environment where you fight other players. There's a lot of work that I'd like to do for the map, but I'm not going to have time just because of all the commotion of moving all my stuff around and getting all my stuff set up. So expect the BRD map to be in a little bit more of a primitive state. Basically, events and special events and stuff like that aren't going to function. The bosses are just going to be standing there ready to aggro. It's mostly a PvP competition inside of BRD where you fight other teams of players as you try and progress through the dungeon and kill the bosses. So come join us tomorrow, 2 p.m. Eastern Time on Sunday, and we'll draft teams. If you have friends that you want to play with, you can join up. We're going to try and even out all the teams. I expect maybe, I don't know, maybe like 20 people to show up, if that. So it'll probably be like 4 or 5 teams of 5. If there's any more or less, then we'll adjust it accordingly. And everybody will have, predefined template gear. I'll start doing bigger production value for the tournaments, but since this is our second one and we're still getting a lot of stuff set up, it's mostly just a fun contest for people following the project, and just have a fun weekend on Warcraft. But look forward to seeing y'all there, and I'm very excited to continue with all this. And until next time, y'all have a good one.